G'day, mate. 40 here, and before I even started speaking, I already had a downvote on this live stream. So if you're going to stand up for anything in life, you need to know that you will get opposition. That doesn't mean you just completely ignore all opposition and criticism. Obviously, you want to take in that which benefits you, which provides you with insight. On the other hand, people will sometimes take exception to things that you say, and there's no point in being too concerned about it. So if you push something forward, you will inevitably experience people pushing back at you. Okay, so we've got about 1 in 1,000 Americans has died in 2020 from COVID-19. But you don't see many pictures. We've got a faceless pandemic. Looking at some great articles on outsidethebeltway.com. So a year after the COVID pandemic started, the casualties are still largely invisible. We have about 344,000 dead Americans. So this is a Pearl Harbor or a 9/11 attack every day at this current rate for 2020. So you might have expected to see more of a human face of COVID-19's dreadful costs, because numbers provide a less vivid and less compelling story than pictures. Well, turns out this was not completely accidental. As COVID-19 tore through the United States in the spring, a senior official in the Trump administration quietly reinforced a set of guidelines that prevent journalists from getting inside all but a handful of hospitals at the front line of the pandemic. The guidelines, citing the medical privacy law known as HIPAA, suggest a virtually impossible standard. So before letting journalists inside COVID-19 wards, hospitals needed prior permission from not only the specific patients the journalists would interview, but also other patients whose names or identities would be accessible. So this is a move essentially to prioritize public relations over reality and public safety. And news outlets have also failed to explain COVID numbers in terms that even innumerate Americans might understand. So there's, say, the Red Rocks Amphitheater, popular live music venue outside of Denver, has a seating capacity of 9,500 people. Now imagine filling this arena 36 times. And every time you fill it, and then everybody in it dies, and then you refill it. So let me just show you. Okay, see that arena? About 9,500 people can be seated there. So imagine filling this 36 times, and with each new seating, everybody dies, then we fill it up again. Or here's Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles. It has a seating capacity of 56,000. So fill it up and empty it 6 times. That is the Fort Myers, Florida, has a population of 82,254 people. So the pandemic has killed the equivalent of 4 Fort Myers. Or take the Trump inauguration crowd. So this pandemic has killed about all the people who came to cheer the beginning of the Trump administration. So much of this is just cultural, because in other societies, news outlets are less delicate about showing carnage from violent crimes, accidents, military operations, and other lethal events. I don't know what the inability to visualize this pandemic has done to the fight against the pandemic, but it certainly hasn't helped. Months into the pandemic, we still have COVID deniers, people who think going maskless is an expression of personal liberty. We have vaccine opponents. We have herd immunity advocates. None of them have to confront the human face of COVID and explain their positions. So I don't agree with every word of that essay, but I still think many of its points were important. So there is a loss in both human dignity and liberty with wearing a mask. That doesn't mean it is outweighed, that loss in human dignity and personal freedom outweighs the possible benefits of wearing a face mask. I understand the case for wearing a face mask indoors. Wearing a face mask outside just seems silly. Now, COVID deniers don't deny that there's a respiratory illness such as COVID-19, generally speaking. It's like Holocaust deniers. They don't deny that there were Jews who died in World War II. So just as with Holocaust deniers, the more intelligent ones, what they primarily deny is the notion that Jews were entirely an innocent party, and two, that this was the greatest crime in all of human history and must become the prism through which we understand all intergroup conflicts. And so too with the so-called COVID deniers, generally speaking, the more intelligent ones aren't denying that there was a respiratory illness that has killed hundreds of thousands of people. They just make the case that it's not such an exceptional respiratory illness, that most of the people who died weren't particularly productive citizens, that this illness is primarily taken very old, very sick people, people with various health conditions. Now, the vaccine opponents, I've less sympathy for them. Herd immunity advocates, right? There's nothing wrong with that because that is the only way we will get past COVID-19 is herd immunity. Now, it'll either be herd immunity through the disease just spreading like wildfire, or be herd immunity brought about by vaccinations. But there's no getting around that in the end, this will come down to herd immunity. That's the only way to move forward. People jogging with masks on, yeah, that's crazy. That's pointless. That's silliness. Okay, so you see in right-wing media such as the Washington Examiner and on Fox News, they are trumpeting the notion that liberal states are shrinking. And again, it's such low IQ nonsense. Yeah, some of these states may have taken a bit of a hit to their growth, or their population may have made a very tiny retreat. But it's just like with Japan. A lot of people, particularly traditionalists, think that Japan is in deep trouble because it is below replacement birth rates. But Japan is one of the most crowded places in the world. So if Japan has a current population of about 125 million, Japan will be a much more pleasant place to live if it gets its population down to 120 million or 115 million or 110 million. And the Japanese are cohesive people. They'll be willing to accept such sacrifices, and they'll automate many jobs. They'll do whatever is necessary. And if Japan's well-being and survival depends upon having more kids, they will have more kids. So a below replacement birth rate trajectory for Japan is not a problem. It is a problem for Russia, and it is a problem for Germany, because Germany in particular is filling its below replacement native population with incompatible immigrants from the Middle East, who tend to have much lower IQs, who tend to have few job skills, who tend not to be disciplined, who tend to commit enormous rates of crime, and who tend to suck up enormous amounts of social welfare spending while feeding back into the system comparatively little in a tax base. Now, much of this analysis about, oh, these liberal states are shrinking because the Dems are the real incompetents, it's just really shoddy analysis, but it's a staple in right-wing media. So we hear that California is such a horrible place, that people are fleeing in droves. Well, guess what? The people who leave California are less educated, have fewer job skills than the people who are pouring into California. Who's pouring into California? People in their 20s with a high degree of education and who are earning a lot of money. Who's leaving California? People who can't cut it, that life here is expensive. So the people who can't compete or are tired of competing in a state where the cost of living is expensive. So these less educated, less skilled, less accomplished people are leaving, and they're being replaced. The people who are moving in are more accomplished, more skilled, more educated, on higher earning trajectories. Now, San Francisco is described as a hellscape, just filled with human feces and used needles. Supposedly nobody wants to live there. And I guess that's why real estate prices are so high in San Francisco. All right, so these editorials on places like Fox News and the Washington Examiner, they say, well, people are leaving liberal states, and they make this simple ideological game where it's pretended that that you can score points based on inflow or outflow of persons, and that said flows They're a direct commentary on prevailing policy in those states, especially tax rates. And Illinois' population has gone down by 308,000 residents in the last 7 years. Oh my God. So that is a decrease in population of less than 1%. And then where are people going? They're going to the Southwest. Well, people have been moving from the Northeast to the Southwest for about 50 years. It's not something new because of Democratic policies in the last 20 years. All right, it's silly to put these kind of ideological point scoring analyses up. All right, so this is the projected map of House reapportionment. Note the shift that's taken place since the 2010 election. So we got 4 more House seats in Texas, 2 more in Florida, 1 in South Carolina and Georgia, 1 more in Arizona, Utah, Nevada, and Washington. And then the Northeast, people are leaving. After 2000, all right, people moving again to the South. Florida, Georgia, Texas, Arizona. Now, map that shows the shifts from 1930 to 2000. That is, people are leaving the North, particularly the Northeast, and they're moving south, and they're moving to the Southwest. Right, this trend has been going on since 1930. It's not because of Democratic policies in 2016 or 2018 or 2020 or even in the year 2000. And so the notion that many right-wingers like to push that low tax states, they're just getting flooded by people. Well, Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi have not been doing particularly well. All right, their congressional apportionment since 1930 has gone down. Alabama's gone down by 2 House seats, Mississippi by 3, Louisiana by 1, Arkansas -3, Oklahoma -4, Missouri -4, Kansas -3. So it's not that people are just flooding out of high tax states and flooding into low tax states. So infrastructure, education, things that require public expenditures often have a direct influence on the ability of places to attract business investment and in migration. Though taxes alone are not enough to induce investment and in migration. So Kansas is engaged in a massive supply side experiment starting in 2012 with a dramatic cut of taxes. Its population has stayed largely flat since then. So Illinois is hardly emptied out. It's lost less than 1% of its population in the last 10 years. And then here is a map for California's growth. Right, California has been known for a high cost of living and a high cost of doing business for decades. Right, people were complaining about this in the 1980s. Well, 1 out of every 8 U.S. residents still lives in California. California has about 40 million people. It's the nation's most populous state. Population is much larger than that of second place Texas, with just 29 million. Third place Florida at 21 million. So of the people I know who are moving out of California, they generally don't have the same level of education, job skills, and income of the people who are moving in. Yeah, growth has slowed. Right? That's not that. That doesn't reflect ill on California. All right, there's nothing wrong with slowing growth. So a lot of these memes in right-wing media are just ridiculous, silly, low IQ, stupid. Well, what's more important, Jim, than living in a gated community is living in a community where you're surrounded by friends and where you're surrounded by a genuine community, where you may participate in the neighborhood watch, where you have excellent relations with the local police force, where you look after each other, where you come to each other's aid. That's more important than even living in a gated community. So it's not so much about building walls, it's about building connections. Laponius Maximum Meridius. Ditto. Blessings. Looking forward to winning again today. I look forward to winning with you, my friend. We're all going to win together. Can schools punish students for off-campus speech? So a cheerleader's vulgar message prompts a First Amendment showdown. So a ninth grade student in Pennsylvania in spring of 2017 having a bad day. She learned she'd failed to make the varsity cheerleading squad. She expressed her frustration on social media, sending a message on Snapchat to about 250 friends. Using a curse word 4 times, the student expressed her dissatisfaction with school, softball, cheer, and everything. Another student took a screenshot of this one and showed it to her mother, a coach. School suspended the student from cheerleading for a year, saying the punishment was needed to avoid chaos and maintain a team-like environment. So the case may seem minor, but the stakes are high. Can schools punish people for things that they say off campus? And it's not clear. Because on the one hand, whatever community you belong to, whether it's a public school, a private school, whether it's a stamp club, a church, or a synagogue, whether it's a bike club, a political club, a video game playing club, every community has certain standards. And if you violate the standards of your community, even if it's away from your community, even if you go on vacation to Turkey and then violate the standards of your stamp club in Turkey, if it gets back to other people in your community, they're very likely to want to impose some consequences on you. So there's no speech without consequences. There's no behavior without consequences. If a student is free to say F her coach on social media, it's not completely unreasonable for a coach to suspend her from the team. If you say F the Jews or F the gays or F the African Americans or F the Mexicans, it's understandable by why many workplaces, many schools would not want you around. So you can argue for free speech, as I do. I love free speech, but I don't have this misconception that free speech means that you're free from the consequences of your choices and that you're free from other people retaliating against you because they don't like your speech. That's just not how the real world works. For every action, there is a reaction. So COVID's killed 1 in 1,000 Americans. 1 in 17 people in the U.S. has been affected, and the worst may well be ahead. All right, the final weeks of Trump. He's whining about losing. Now he's whining about legislation, and he's creating chaos along the way from outside the Beltway. So Trump's waning days in office have been both remarkable and unsurprising. His actions continue to drip of narcissism and ignorance to create a slurry of nonsense never before generated by a U.S. president. We're all aware that he has whined incessantly about his electoral loss. Well, according to him, the massive, unbelievable fraud that was perpetrated against him by the massive algorithmic dumps of the ghost of Hugo Chavez. Now the tune has shifted to complaining about the COVID relief bill, part of the omnibus spending package that he didn't want to sign, and his vetoing of the defense appropriations bill. And these monkey wrenches are being tossed into the machinery during Christmas time, and Trump seems not to care about the consequences. As Rolling Stone notes, while in Florida golfing, Trump allows jobless benefits to expire for millions. So the agent of chaos sows all the more chaos as he is set to leave office, demonstrating yet again that A, it is all about him, B, does not really understand how governing works, proving, not surprisingly, that he has learned nothing during his time in office. Learning requires wanting to know things. If Trump had truly wanted higher relief payments, he almost certainly could have had them. If he had any political competence, he could have gotten those higher relief payments. He could have had them prior to the election, which would have been to his advantage. Trump is simply not very good at basic politics. Trump could have seen to it that every American was, say, getting $1,000 a month. He could have found enough support for that during COVID. He could have ensured this prior to the election. Would have been to his benefit. Let's have a look at the chat. I'm a lawyer. I win. That's what I do, says Laponius. Will Trump run in 2024? Right now, I'd say the odds are about 50%. Do I live in a homogeneous community? Well, the geographic location I live in has quite a bit of diversity, but the people I spend time with are fairly homogeneous. They're Ashkenazi Orthodox Jews, by and large. Is there a more compromised and controlled individual than Trump? Yeah, but most of the compromise and controlled is internal. But can I assume that there are not many joggers in your community? There are quite a few joggers, but not generally at the synagogues I frequent. Many in your community advocate and promote multicultural diversity. That's not true. Nobody in my community of Orthodox Jews advocates or promotes multicultural diversity. Winning in the game of life. Watch Luke's walking live stream from back in March and find out if you are winning in the game of life. Okay, Trump just simply isn't very good at basic politics. Remember how people used to think he was playing multi-dimensional chess? So I've largely stopped watching Scott Adams. He's been pushing for years this notion that Trump is playing this multi-dimensional chess game. He's simply incompetent in the most basic tasks of government. If he'd simply put a little effort into making sure that everybody was getting, say, $1,000 a month during the lockdown, during the shutdown, he could have had that prior to the election and may well have won a second term. So Trump has a flair for crowd manipulation. He has an advanced instinct for media manipulation, but he doesn't know what he's doing in his actual job as president. So we know back in July that Trump was antagonizing GOP megadonor Sheldon Adelson in a heated phone call. So Adelson, 87-year-old, had reached out to Trump to talk about the coronavirus relief bill and the economy, but Trump brought the conversation around to why Adelson wasn't doing more to bolster his election. So apparently the president had no idea that Sheldon Adelson had donated tens of millions of dollars to pro-Trump efforts and how much Sheldon had helped him. Adelson chose not to come back at Trump. But when word of the call circulated, Republican Party officials grew alarmed. The president had antagonized one of his biggest benefactors at a precarious moment in his campaign. I mean, it was manifestly stupid to essentially antagonize his biggest donor. So the Trump Blessed America First Political Action Committee was being massively outraised and outspent by the leading pro-Biden super PAC Priorities USA. So Biden's team massively raised more money than Trump's team. And Republicans point to an array of reasons for Trump PAC's struggle. Some of the president's aides point out he's shown less interest in super PAC fundraising than Barack Obama did ahead of Obama's successful 2012 re-election, and Trump was reluctant to do the kind of glad-handing, cold-calling, and grooming of billionaires needed to cultivate a well-funded super PAC. So who could have guessed that Trump might not want to work very hard? Instead, he just wanted to watch a lot of TV, just called it executive time. And much of the donor reluctance to support Trump was linked to not wanting to invest in what increasingly looked like a losing cause. And main reason that Trump lost is he had so little interest in developing an effective coronavirus relief legislation. He just had no interest in getting a second round of relief out into the economy. We had this pandemic, we had massive job loss, we had a GDP contraction, we had a Democrat-controlled House willing to spend a ton of money, we had a Senate minority willing to do so as well. So you would have had, if Trump wanted it, some kind of legislation where every American got $1,000 a month during the pandemic if he had to say taxes the previous year earning less than $75,000. And this would have bolstered Trump's re-election chances. He would have shown a little semblance of caring for the people who have suffered, particularly in swing states during these difficult times. So if he'd pulled off any kind of deal for a second relief package, it would have been to his benefit. It's populism 101 that a populist politician uses his political office to find ways to send money, send resources to help his supporters in ways that help the populist leader's political fortunes. Trump was not willing to do that. He was not interested in doing that. Instead, he just kept handing Democrats reason after reason for voters to vote for them and not for Republicans. Here we have the middle of a serious economic downturn. The Democrats are willing to help. The Republicans are not. Who does that help electorally in November? So without a $600 weekly benefit, unemployed face bleak choices, noted the New York Times back in August. Till a few days ago, most analysts expected Congress to agree on a new emergency spending bill that would include a partial extension of extra unemployment benefits. But negotiations stalled, and President Trump simply had no interest in getting such relief legislation across the finish line. The benefits run out, negotiations stall, the president plays golf. Terrible politics. And then Trump threatens to bypass Congress as stimulus talks fail again. And what would he do? He would reduce the payroll tax, which was not the kind of relief that most people need. Not even sure that he could pull it off legally. And the whole impasse was in the United States Senate, which is controlled by Republicans. So Trump remained steadfast in his opposition to any money for state and local governments, which he said falsely would only go to states run by Democrats. So he can try to blame Democrats, but this was just incredibly stupid politics and bad governance. Trump only managed to win the White House by roughly 78,000 votes over 3 usually Democratic states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. You'd think he might have understood the value of votes on the margins. Was there anyone that Trump has been listening to for political advice? Apparently, he doesn't listen to anyone. So Trump never knew how to govern. And he did not even know how to run for re-election. Okay, let's get some COVID relief here from therapist Katie Moore.
Responsible for other people's emotions, including my therapist. I constantly analyze people to ensure I know how they're feeling so that I can respond appropriately. This is an exhausting habit of mine and causes me to not be able to meet my own needs. It's especially unhealthy in therapy because I'm so concerned with how my therapist is doing and how I make her feel. She has very healthy boundaries with me and has not played into this issue at all. I believe it really is a me problem. I think it causes me to hold back in session because I don't want to make her sad. For context, I'm completely an empath type and was a parentified child of a single mom. Do you have any advice? Now, first of all, we all know how important boundaries are in life, right? These emotional and physical borders allow us and those around us to feel heard, understood, and respected. But when boundaries are crossed, those benefits are completely lost. Our boundaries can be crossed by others in our life, as well as ignored by us, meaning that maybe we never considered what was okay or not okay for us, or we don't feel confident enough in ourselves to communicate what types of things we won't accept from others. And I just think it's important to mention that here because I find, to be honest, that we're very quick to blame it on others or just not want to talk to someone anymore when we're just as much to blame, if not more so, for the boundary itself being crossed. And the reason that I bring up boundaries is because this question reeks of a complete lack of them. When we think, or more likely believe, that we are actually responsible for how someone else feels, our ability to do what's best for us is impaired. Not to mention that we are not responsible for how someone else feels. They own that. Just like the person who asked this question said, this is an exhausting habit of mine and it causes me to not be able to meet my own needs. It's super exhausting, and for many reasons. But the main reason is that we cannot read other people's minds. And no matter what we do, we can't make people feel any kind of way. When we engage in this type of behavior, we forget that the other person has a choice. Imagine that. They get to choose how to react or respond to us, and there isn't anything that can be done to ensure we get the response we want. This type of thinking and behavior is really common in children who grew up in homes where addiction was an issue, or abuse, as well as those who were parentified, like the person who asked this question. The reason this is so common in homes like that is because we don't feel free to be ourselves and be independent. Too much of our life is wrapped up and affected deeply by unhealthy things that someone else is doing. Too much of it is out of our control, and so we control the one thing that we can, ourselves. We can think that if we just say or do the right thing, they won't hurt us or use drugs or be sad all the time. But going back to what I already mentioned, we don't control them. They have free will to do, feel, act, and think however they want. And so we try harder and harder to make things better or okay, and that ends up hindering our own growth and confidence. This type of behavior can also express itself in over-apologizing. When we don't get the response that we're hoping for, or they still use alcohol or abuse us, we can think that we are to blame, or that maybe if we had just said sorry, they wouldn't do the hurtful thing anymore. We can also apologize because as our confidence gets lower and lower, we can feel like we don't have a right to take up space, or have needs or wants, or possibly even be in this world. We can say sorry for just being ourselves and doing what anyone else would do. For example, like I really struggle with over-apologizing, and I used to apologize to strangers in the grocery store for being in the aisle looking at what I wanted to buy, like trying to make a decision. And I would apologize just because they needed to get by me. I mean, that's crazy, right? But it was really hard for me to stop doing this. And when I get really stressed out, I will start to over-apologize and really apologize for everything. It's super frustrating. And okay, so this sucks, and we all do it. And we hate that we do, so what do we do about it? Well, the first thing, and what was actually the most helpful for me personally, was to start noticing how often we get upset about something someone else did. I know this sounds strange, but just stay with me. Like the person trying to get past me in the store, for example. If I was trying to get past someone else, would I be upset at them for being there and expect an apology? Of course I wouldn't. Or do I expect everyone in my life to do exactly what I want? And if they don't, I become irate? Nope. What if someone said something that was upsetting to me? Would I immediately lash out at them? Of course I wouldn't. Paying attention to what is upsetting and what is us going overboard in an effort to not upset anyone, like walking on eggshells, it can help us see when we are going too far. It kind of puts things in perspective, or I've used this term check the facts, and it's kind of another way of checking those facts. And another tip is taking the time to journal, you knew this was coming, or even just recognize when we're trying to read someone's mind, or think we can see the future. So often when we don't have healthy boundaries and are enmeshed with people in our lives, we can think that we can read their minds and do certain things to get them to act in a particular way. I'm sorry to tell you, but we can't. So check your facts, like real, tangible, could stand up in court facts, not assumptions, not reading minimal body language, pauses, or whatever. And this goes for trying to see the future. We can't know what's going to come next, and constantly trying to predict it is exhausting, not to mention anxiety-provoking. So notice if you're doing either of those things, and check your facts. I promise this tip helped me a lot. And next, communicate. Sure, we can do some of this unhealthy behavior with strangers, like those people in the grocery store, but it mostly happens with those that we are in close relationships with. So take advantage of that fact and start talking. Let them know that you find yourself doing this and that you're going to try and stop. Talk to them about boundaries. Explain what they are maybe, and how you're trying to figure out what yours are. And then when you do that, when you put those boundaries in place, and just FYI, I have videos about these things so you can search for them and find them. And once you put those boundaries in place, you can let them know what they are. And then, you guessed it, talk more about it. It's okay to tell people what we are thinking, feeling, and doing. In fact, our relationships and ourselves will improve because of it. Also, when we are communicating with people, make sure you're asking questions, not making assumptions, right? Ask them if they are in fact angry. See if something you did was truly upsetting or not. Or just check in with people. We aren't expected to know what's going on or if everything's okay unless we ask. And be open to sharing your own thoughts and upsets as they happen, because they can't read our minds either. I know, surprising.
Guys, please feel free to share your thoughts, your feelings, anything that's upsetting you, bothering you. This is a safe space for you to share your feelings. Okay, having a look at the chat, Half Galician says, Trump is like an adult that no one wants to talk to at the adult end of the table, so he goes to the kids' table and riles them up. Trump really didn't like genuflecting in front of donut billionaires because they had no respect for him and they were richer and more alpha. He likes doing shtick rallies for plebs. Therapist is a great career track for yentas engaging in pseudoscience replete with jargon. Only MDs should be therapists in the age of neuroscience and psychobiology. Yeah, this is a safe place, guys. You can absolutely feel safe here. Okay, so the amazing thing of all of this, once again, back to Trump, is that if Trump wanted higher relief payments, he could have had them. So of the many amazing aspects of Trump's move a few days before Christmas to object to the amount of direct payments to Americans is that he has had an agent of his administration in the middle of the negotiations, Secretary of the Treasury, Steve Mnuchin. So if Trump had wanted $2,000 instead of $600, he could have made his preferences known and done some work. But Trump has been detached from his job. The White House explicitly told Senate Republicans weeks ago that it supported pursuing the omnibus. Okay, all those different 12 appropriations bill tied into one single big package that idiots on the right particularly say, oh, why is there aid for Sudan in a coronavirus relief bill? It's because there are 12 different appropriations bills tied into one single package. Okay, the negotiations for the coronavirus relief bill has been going on for months. The White House was always fully aware of what was in the bill. They agreed upon it, but Trump himself had not paid any attention. Here's the wording from CNN. White House officials acknowledged late Tuesday that Trump himself had not received a detailed briefing on the package before its passage. And Stephen Taylor here at OutsideTheBeltway.com notes, I'm struck by the formulation the White House in such a report usually assumes the inclusion, indeed the direction of the President of the United States. But in the Trump White House, the President doesn't engage in detailed briefings. Now, Trump reportedly did ask about higher payments, and his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, talked him out of it. So there is some level of consistency to Trump's reaction as he has a multi-decade prejudice against foreign aid. But remember, foreign aid accounts for less than 1% of our annual budget. I'm against it, but it's insignificant. It underscores how little Trump understands how massive bills such as this one are constructed. And speaking of Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, Washington Post notes, Mnuchin's loyalty to Trump could end with painful setback as President shreds stimulus deal. The president's denunciation of the agreement represented a stunning broadside, public broadside, against his own Treasury Secretary, who for 4 years loyally shielded the president's tax returns, endured repeated presidential tirades in private, and even defended some of Trump's most incendiary and contradictory remarks. So has anyone had their life or career enhanced by working for Donald Trump? It seems overwhelmingly that if people experience something from working for Trump, it's a negative experience, that it hurts their reputation. I mean, Trump has a long history of chewing up and spitting out those who are loyal to him. One conservative policy expert at the Manhattan Institute says loyalty and assistance to President Trump generally gets rewarded with humiliation. This is how it ends for a lot of people who work for the guy. Secretary Mnuchin is being completely embarrassed. And Trump's allies are left to deal with the mess. Pennsylvania Senator Pat Toomey said Trump will be remembered for erratic behavior. Trump will be remembered for chaos and misery and erratic behavior if he does not sign this COVID relief bill. So chaos, misery, and erratic behavior being hallmarks of Donald Trump's time as president and hallmarks of Donald Trump's time in charge of anything. And this also illustrates why lame duck congressional sessions are terrible ideas. Donald Trump faces no electoral consequences for any of this, which is true for any member of Congress exiting in January. It is fundamentally anti-democratic to have all of these major decisions undertaken by politicians who will never have to face the voters. So I don't know of any other democracy that operates this way. In England, in Australia, in Canada, when you win an election, you take power within 2 or 3 days. You don't wait for 3 months, such as the situation in the United States.
And to make sure I answer that question completely, because I know her question had a lot to do with therapy. In therapy, you don't have to worry about what you say to your therapist. It's the one place where there isn't any judgment, and that time is set aside just for you. We are there to listen, understand, and assist you on your way to a better you. There aren't any right or wrong things to say. Just be as honest as you can about where you are and what you're thinking and doing, and I promise you it will change your life. So let them know this is happening. Check in. Tell them how it's still a struggle. Just be honest about your process, and they can help you work through it. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, please share it. Like I said,
Okay.
is the inability to experience pleasure during activities that you used to enjoy. Meaning that if you used to love snowboarding, guilty, but now it just seems like too much work. And even when you get up onto the hill and you just wish you could just go back down and go to bed. And so that's what anhedonia is. We just don't feel pleasure for things that we used to feel pleasure about. And just so we can understand anhedonia a little bit more, I always think of it as a big loss in our life. I mean, it can feel like we can't enjoy anything anymore. Food could lose its taste or just seem not what it used to be, or it could rob us of our social life or even the ability to enjoy sex. And anhedonia can be part of many mental illnesses, even though we mainly hear it talked about with regard to major depressive disorder. But it can be part of schizophrenia, eating disorders, anxiety disorders, BPD, etc. And so just know that it's not just depression. Anhedonia, that lack of enjoyment or pleasure, can be a symptom of a lot of things. And I think that's why it's really important that we don't just self-diagnose. We also see a mental health professional or other health professional so that we are properly diagnosed and treated. Because if we have schizophrenia, That's very different from having an eating disorder, and the treatments are going to be very different. And so just make sure that even as I'm talking about this and describing to you what anhedonia is, we're not jumping to the conclusion that it only happens with depression, okay? And an interesting side effect of anhedonia that I've been noticing more and more with my patients, maybe it's because I don't know if you guys know, I specialize in self-injury as well as eating disorder work. And so I'm noticing that this lack of enjoyment, or honestly, it can be like a total numb out where we just don't feel anything. It can lead us to engaging in some dangerous behaviors in order to.
Okay, so please share in the chat what dangerous behaviors you've been engaging in because you just don't enjoy anything anymore. This is a safe space for you to share about your self-harming tendencies. Okay, here are some more crazy aspects of Donald Trump's fraud allegations. So there are any number of insane and inane elements in the voter fraud narrative spun by Trump and his fraud truther minions. And will they lose any credibility after Joe Biden takes office January 20th? A lot of it is nonsense like, how can the guy who won the most votes ever for a sitting president lose? Easy answer. If the challenger wins even more votes than the incumbent, or no candidate has ever won both Florida and Ohio and lost. Except, of course, JFK did it in 1960, not to mention that there are multiple routes to 270 Electoral College votes, and several of them bypass Ohio and Florida. So this does not even get into issues of massive dumps or the ghost of Hugo Chavez. So one thing that stands out in the insanity of Trump's allegations about voter fraud, that if the fraud that Trump alleges happened, it would be easily the biggest and the most significant electoral fraud of all time. There's nothing that would rival it in a functioning democratic state. Now, second, electoral fraud, specifically massive electoral fraud, is very, very hard to pull off as a general matter. Even minor electoral fraud is very hard to pull off. So truly massive fraud of the scale that Team Trump has alleged has historically only been possible in places like Mexico and Colombia, where the incumbent regime had control of the key parts of the state apparatus. Now, substantial parts of the jurisdictions that Team Trump disputes are controlled by Republicans, the incumbent party. Republicans control the national executive and significant amounts of power in the 6 states that took the longest to be settled: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. State executives oversee elections under the guidance of state legislatures and the rulings of state courts. And these places have been dominated by Republicans. So Republicans were governors in Arizona and Georgia. Republicans held the House in Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. Republicans held the Senate in Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. Republicans were the Secretary of State in Georgia and Nevada. So the entire state government of Georgia is controlled by the incumbent party, the Republicans, and yet counts, recounts, or clearly confirm a Joe Biden win. Now, if you're on the right, you may well consider Stacey Abrams a malevolent influence in Georgia and that she has magical powers. She's not the governor. She's not the Secretary of State. She holds no position of power in state government. So Republicans controlled important levers of power in all these states. The notion that the challenging party and their allies would be able to perpetrate massive electoral fraud simply doesn't track. So if Biden won via fraud, it'd be the biggest such fraud of all time. And if Biden won via fraud, it'd be all the harder since he was the challenger and the incumbent party controlled important aspects of government in the states being contested by Team Trump. So why don't you enjoy anything anymore? Let's learn more about anhedonia.
To quote unquote feel something. Even recently, I was just watching a Law and Order SVU show. You guys know I watch that a lot. But the main character, or actually the person who was on trial, engaged in extreme wrestling. And it was a way for them to feel something. They talked about it, in the courtroom. And it was really interesting to me because I've had patients that find self-injury this way. Or even I sign up for bungee jumping or other adrenaline-inducing activities. And so just pay attention that if you aren't finding joy, or you feel like you're numbed out, you're not feeling anything, be cautious about, saying you're an adrenaline junkie and taking on new activities that could be really dangerous for you. It's more important that we figure out what's causing this for us and we get it treated, okay? And also, I just want to say that anhedonia can harm our relationships because if nothing seems enjoyable, we can be hard to be around. We could totally be a negative Nancy or not up for as much as we used to be because it can seem or it can feel like a lot of work. And maybe we don't enjoy that work anymore, right? I don't want to go out. I don't want to shower and get dressed up and be around people. It can feel really like too much. And if none of that is fun, what's it worth? What's the use of doing it? We just aren't going to want to. Okay, now let's get into the second part of this question. Why anhedonia happens. Now, like everything in psychology, we don't know for sure because our brain is complex and everybody's different and we aren't able to study a brain while it's doing what it does each and every day. But we do know that dopamine, which if you don't know what dopamine is, it's a neurotransmitter or a chemical in our brain. It's what makes us feel good. And so it's responsible for attention, movement regulation, and emotional responses. And so we know that lower levels of dopamine in specific parts of our brain is connected to anhedonia. And they've also connected lower levels of serotonin and GABA, which are just other neurotransmitters or other chemicals in our brain. They've connected those to anhedonia as well. And we also know that feelings of joy, excitement, and reward come from specific parts of our brain. Kind of cool. These parts are called the mesolimbic dopamine pathway and the mesocortical pathway.
Man, I love it when she talks like this. I love it when she talks about brain science. Since Trump lost the election, I have added a third egg to my omelet. I just recklessly don't care about the cholesterol anymore. I'm a drunk and a horse thief. Trump really wanted to win the election. He would have stayed away from Sidney Powell and Giuliani. Republicans did not run the polling centers, bro. They did run many of them. Silicon Valley oligarchs and consumer product advertisers control the culture and discourse, really only incidental to culture. Who controls the White House? Luke, have you read the works of the late Sam Francis regarding managerial society? No, I've read some of Sam Francis, but I haven't read his magnum opus. I want to hear Katie talking about brain science.
And you can dig into what those really are. Really, the name like mesolimbic and mesocortical kind of tell you where they lie in the brain. And it involves various parts of our brain, right? These are both pathways, so they're going through our brain. But it involves areas like the prefrontal cortex, right? Right behind our forehead, our amygdala, talked about that a lot, and many, many more. So if there are any abnormalities in these parts of our brain, even if we've had like a head injury or, if we're in sports and we've been knocked out, we could have a concussion, that could maybe cause this as well. And so if anything's happening in those areas, it could lead to us not enjoying things anymore. Or at least those are one part of what is a very complex problem. So that's what we know about why anhedonia happens.
Yeah, guys, hit up my PayPal. We're stopping the fraud here on the Luke Ford Show. Trump 2021. Let's go. Just, hit up my PayPal so I can fight the steal. Stop the steal.
But let's talk a little bit about treatment. And unfortunately, not all SSRIs or SNRIs, otherwise known as antidepressants, treat anhedonia. Obviously, everyone is different, but because anhedonia is one of the leading causes of suicidal thoughts, we need to get much better at treating it. And newer research does show that ketamine infusions can help treat it. And if you don't know what ketamine infusions are, you have to go, the thing that is kind of sucky about this, and hopefully they'll get better at allowing us to take ketamine, but for now, you have to go to the doctor and you get hooked up to an IV with the ketamine and you have to sit there for like 30 minutes. And then after the infusion's done, they want you to sit for a while as well. And you have to have someone drive you home. It can be very difficult to manage when we have very busy lives or we work a lot of jobs, and a lot of insurances do cover it, which is great, but it's just very time consuming. But it's great that at least we know that it does help those of us who suffer with anhedonia. There's also TMS treatment, which if you don't know what that is, it's transcranial magnetic stimulation. And this again is also very time consuming. Most of my patients who've tried TMS go like 5 times a week, 3 to 5 times a week. And you have to sit there for at least a half an hour, sometimes more, it's like a helmet that you put on, and it has these magnets that are specifically placed to kind of jumpstart different parts of your brain. So if we think the depression or the anhedonia symptoms are over here, we might trigger that and it might stimulate it because it's trying to get your brain going. It's like, hey, you're not doing this thing you're supposed to do. And it might potentially, since we talked about GABA and dopamine, it might make that start up again. Maybe it will trigger it and maybe we'll start to feel better. And I've heard from a lot of you and a lot of my patients that it's been really beneficial. So that's something that can help. Also, some research, and I know people are going to get frustrated with this, but a lot of research shows that ECT or electroconvulsive therapy has helped those with anhedonia.
Okay, so have you guys heard about the diarist Arthur Inman? You're not going to believe this guy. Arthur Inman, he liked groping women. He enjoyed having sex with women who were not his wife. And what's really crazy, this guy did not like Jews. He did not like the Irish. He did not like blacks. And he loved Adolf Hitler. I mean, how crazy is this? The guy enjoyed committing adultery. He enjoyed having girls sit on his lap. He enjoyed groping women, not his wife. He hated Jews. He hated black people. And I mean, how can you understand this? This is just bewildering. Like, he would pay women to come sit with him, all right? Because he had chronic fatigue syndrome or something, very similar to chronic fatigue
years
syndrome.
old when he died. This is also the story of another man, Professor Daniel Aaron, who at the age of 92 is still on the English faculty at Harvard. He never met Arthur Inman, yet the two men's stories are deeply intertwined. That's because Professor Aaron spent 10 years of his life reading, then editing, what is possibly the longest diary ever written, 155 volumes.
So Arthur Inman, in his diary, he wrote, May 11, 1933, Hitler is certainly a sensible bird to drive the German Jews out of Germany, provided he is clever enough to do it without wrecking American business. Whoops. Okay, here we go.
Deeply intertwined. That's because Professor Aaron spent 10 years of his life reading, then editing, what is possibly the longest diary ever written, 155 volumes, 17 million words, the bizarre diary of Arthur Inman.
I think he wanted to be famous. I think he wanted to write a book that nobody else had written. He was very much attracted to success.
As the only son of an extremely wealthy family from Atlanta, Arthur Inman was expected to succeed. But halfway through college in Pennsylvania, he suffered a breakdown.
He describes it very graphically in the diary, that he simply collapsed. It could no longer function. It was both physical and mental.
So, yeah, he collapsed into something like chronic fatigue syndrome after his second year at college. So in 1933, the spring of 1933, when Hitler was doing his thing, T.S. Eliot spoke to the University of Virginia about the reestablishment of a native culture. He was being just like Hitler, bro. T.S. Eliot said, it is not necessarily those lands which are the most fertile or most favored in climate seem to me the happiest, but those in which a long struggle of adaptation between man and his environment has brought out the best qualities of both, which the landscape has been molded by numerous generations of one race, and in which the landscape, in turn, has modified the race to its own character. Wow, just like Hitler.
For the rest of his life, Inman was plagued by dozens of ailments, both real and imagined. While he was still a young man, he married Evelyn Yates, a Wellesley girl.
So apparently, to many modernist literary figures in the early 20th century, restoration through the creation of homogeneity appeared desirable. And they wanted England and Palestine to two movements towards nationalism, the freedom from traditional and conventional verities and nationally binding conviction that comes with exile is what Thorsten Veblen considered a precondition of intellectual achievement, but the poets disagreed. They preferred to put down roots in reclaimed territory and to worship at the altar of tradition, just like Hitler.
The couple settled in Boston in a modest apartment hotel called Garrison Hall. For decades, Inman rarely left the building. He simply couldn't tolerate either noise or light.
He was kept from the world. He lived in this, in effect, in a darkened room with excursions from time to time on his various automobiles. He couldn't stand the sound of trucks going down his street. He wanted Evelyn to go down to the state authorities and ask him to cordon it off, or to allow him to put sort of straw on the streets to cushion the sound, so that it was a mania.
This is Arthur Inman, and he's sitting in the middle of a dark room. And
while Inman hid from the noise and glare of the outside world,
So Arthur Crewe Inman was born in Atlanta, May 11th, 1895, the only child of wealthy and prominent parents. School years in Pennsylvania were unhappy. His 2 years at Haverford College were miserable. He terminated his formal education at the age of 20 when he developed a mysterious illness that would not respond to conventional medical treatment. He says, my whole nervous system went on strike. He married in 1923. He settled in Boston and cultivated his semi-invalid state for the next 40 years. Comfortable allowance allowed him to foot his medical bills and support an expensive establishment at Garrison Hall, then a somewhat seedy but respectable apartment hotel in Boston's Back Bay. In that snug borough, a succession of paid helpers, men and women, but mostly women, catered to his needs. Since he required around-the-clock attention, the cooking and the cleaning, the airing and curtaining of rooms, the driving of automobiles, the secretarial duties, and the negotiations with the outside world were parceled out among fluctuating personnel, including his wife, the heroine of his diary. So he conceived of writing an extensive diary in the early 1920s. It was to be a diary unlike any other ever written, an absolutely honest record of himself and his age. It was all meant to win him fame. So this guy, he loved Hitler. He loved fame. He loved having sex with women, not his wife. He loved groping women, not his wife. He hated blacks, he hated Jews, and he hated the Irish. So he wrote, "Will this diary make me illustrious one of these days? If so, it will do so only when I am long dead. I wish I knew whether it were worth the nervous perseverance with which I have striven to hold up quality, honesty, and virility. When I put down a tide of words, do they carry sense to another mind than my own? I want to picture myself. I want to picture America. If I am to be tortured, let me never neglect to see to it that I make constructive use of each new sensation and experience with which I am harassed." Wow, he sounds like me. Who knows, but one day this jagged document may lend succor of spirit to some poor devil of a soul. So Arthur Inman was a minute observer of himself. He also stayed in touch with life in ordinary America through an ingenious device. In late December 1924, he placed an advertisement in the Boston Evening Transcript that read, "Wanted, persons who have had interesting experiences and who can tell them interestingly to talk to an invalid, $1 an evening." People who responded served as his principal windows to the world. Some of these paid talkers became friendly visitors, intimates, or correspondents. Although Inman enjoyed listening to men, guess what? This guy clearly preferred the company of women. And young women in particular fascinated him, not only because he loved to fondle and in some cases have sex with them, but because he could identify with their anxieties and sympathize with their resistance to parental restraints. He was, in every sense, an explorer of women. He studied their moods and their vagaries. He bought them clothes. He corrected their speech. He counseled them on their love affairs, presumably after or before he has sex with them. He took down the life histories of his female talkers and he relished their chit-chat. The diary, among other things, is an offbeat and unconventional study of American women. What a guy.
He filled his time recording hundreds of hours of conversations.
Here comes poor darling dear Evelyn with her poor bag.
Yes, I know. Well, that's all right. I'm here. I'm still here.
He wasn't very nice to his wife. He complained that she made no effort to talk in a way which did not irritate him, that she either whines or sounds like back alley. Her voice annoys me to desperation. Last night I was tired. She commenced to whine. I told her to talk humanly or else get out. One thing led to another. I talked to her in a manner no self-respecting rat would have listened to. If she protested, her empty words were a shaft to a fire. God, what a spiritless worm. There was talk of divorce, but the marriage lasted until Inman shot himself at age 68. He dedicated his diary to his wife. The diary concealed nothing, no crudeness toward his wife, no grossness toward the world. One of Inman's woman visitors had had an operation that left her sterile. Inman noted August 6, 1930. Evelyn and I are wondering how Johnny Gasoyan, Syrian, will look back upon this sterility outcome of the matter. He wanted children. All the dirty races want them. They want children, the dirty races. When all is looked at calmly, not the anti-Nordics colonizing and appropriating America for themselves, as surely and as unremittingly as did our Nordic ancestors take over this continent from the Indians. Wow, disavow. Did you hear what he said? That all the dirty races want children, and that the anti-Nordics are colonizing and appropriating America for themselves, as surely and as unremittingly as did our Nordic ancestors take over this continent from the Indians. This guy didn't want darker waves of immigrants. He loathed the filthy Irish. He despised the unspeakable Jews. He admired Hitler. He called FDR the rat. He praised Calvin Coolidge and Richard Nixon, and he wept when Joseph McCarthy died.
He recorded hours of morose soliloquies.
All this pain, and it never ends. And when one pain stops, another begins. And anyone in this world feels as alone as I feel.
Inman may have felt lonely, but he was far from alone. He would summon armies of people to his universe, doctors, specialists, workmen, and scores of young women who were hired to read to him and tell him about their lives. It often became intimate.
This is Paula, back from her trip to Lake Placid to see her boyfriend, Bud. Did he pet you nicely, Paula?
Oh, Artie, dear. You shouldn't say things like that.
Hundreds of people came to Garrison Hall over the years, and their stories became fodder for what was to be Inman's literary legacy, the diary. Before he died, he put money in a trust so that one day the work would be published. Harvard University.
How did he enjoy having sex and fondling all these women? I mean, when he's got a lovely wife, a very sensible woman, approximately his own age, with whom he could have a mature and equal relationship. You know, a strong woman his own age. She's got wisdom from life. They're going to have so much more in common. And yet this guy preferred to fondle and fornicate with all these young, attractive women who are not his wife, while he was loving Hitler, despising the Irish, and hating Jews. How is he even able to get erect with that kind of mindset?
The press hired Daniel Aaron to handle the project.
I cursed myself after I embarked on this. Anyone would write angry letters to Inman, just in my own journal, cursing him out and describing my real feelings about him and how worthless I thought he was and how disgusting I thought he was.
Professor Aaron says, despite all the lunacy, the diary does have artistic merit and historical perspective. But most of all, he says, it offers a devastating candor he in some ways came to admire.
I came to see him as a man who had his own kind of courage and his own peculiar genius. He would say things that few people would admit about themselves.
So he ended up with a Jewish editor. So this guy's a Jewish professor of English literature who edited his diary.
I came to believe finally that he could become world famous, and he could do that simply by being absolutely honest.
Arthur Inman had a long list of people and things he despised. At the top of the list, of all things, the Prudential Center. The Pru had been under construction for years and was just completed the year Arthur Inman shot himself. Some people say that's part of the reason he shot himself.
He said very early, if I'm going to die sometime, it's noise that will kill me. It's not the buildings that he hates. He's holed up, and he's in his bastion, and they're battering down that bastion. And he had to get out.
I'm lost, and I'm afraid, and bewildered, and I don't know what to do. There is no end.
Arthur Inman never worked a day in his life. He lived off his family's vast fortune. Now, over the years, he purchased not just his own, but several other apartments at Garrison Hall so that he could literally buffer himself from the outside world.
And Anthony, inside his world, Arthur Inman carried on what can only be called a highly irregular love life. Of all the peculiar aspects of Arthur Inman's life, perhaps at the top of the list is his history with women, especially his wife Evelyn, who agreed to marry this self-proclaimed invalid, a man who believed women needed to be dependent and docile.
I think that there was a time when he was testing her in their marriage at the beginning, when he felt that she needed discipline, and he would knock her knees with milk bottles and things like that, and he'd put her through all kinds of things.
Perhaps it's no surprise that eventually Evelyn hit the bottle.
Every morning, Evelyn gets some Johnny Walker in her little pink glass, and she says it makes her feel better, and maybe it does.
It eliminates my frustrations. It makes me able to feel as though I'm doing just what I like to do.
You think she would have left him forever and not had anything to do with him. And that seems to me the strangest thing. Why Evelyn and other women retained an affection for him.
Nice talking to you.
And I love Betty very much.
And I love Artie very much.
And I think we've got lots to give each other.
And there were literally hundreds of other women who came into Arthur Inman's lair at Garrison Hall. Amazingly, it was Evelyn, his wife, who helped bring them there. She did it by placing small ads in the newspaper on behalf of her husband.
He would put in an advertisement that he wanted somebody to come in and read to him, and that he would pay them $1 an hour or more. And then if he liked them, they would become a part of his life.
I really like Betty very, very much, and she's awful sweet.
Quite often, Inman wanted more than reading and talking. Professor Aaron's assistant for 10 years, Libby Smith, spoke with dozens of Inman's women during the years she was helping research the diaries.
Why did he want more? He had a wife, his own age, someone who could be his equal and stand up to him like a strong, independent woman. Why did he want to get it off with all these young, attractive, nubile women?
As the years go by, the girls get younger and younger and younger.
Why? 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 Why does he want the fresh peach when he could have the moldy old peach that the dog sat on? Why does this guy want not just one fresh peach, but as many fresh peaches as he could possibly consume? Why wouldn't he be satisfied with just one fresh peach? Why wasn't he just happy with the old moldy peach that the dog sat on? This is crazy.
And he was more looking to them for the affection than he wasn't getting anywhere else. He was a sexual man, but he was, to him, touching a young girl was much more to his liking than an actual sexual relationship with someone.
This is Saturday, and Nancy was all withdrawn, and she wouldn't sit on my lap, and she wouldn't pet me today.
He liked the fun. He liked buying them fancy clothes. You characterize him as lower middle class, looking for a job, looking maybe from a broken home, certainly in need of money that he could give them.
One of the young women who showed up for work was Barbara Laplace, who at the time was a student at Wellesley College. Today she lives in Florida with her husband.
The job was reading or talking with this partially blind man. He asked questions like, did you love your mother? Did you love your father? Just all sorts of, have you got a boyfriend? It was strange, but when you're that young, if your mind is open enough, you aren't frightened. You're just, oh, this is interesting and different.
Inman never made any advances on Barbara. She apparently wasn't the right type.
He claimed that all he had to do was look at the girl and look at her face, and he could tell whether she was approachable or not. Meaning,
yeah, I mean, there's some very uncomfortable parallels between myself and this Arthur Crew Inman, except I'm not a racist, and I'm chaste, and I'm in recovery. But yeah, I kind of understand that bit about you can just glance at a woman and get a sense whether she's approachable or not. I've had that sensation myself.
anything he felt like doing or having done to him.
While Arthur was feasting on love and affection from his girls, Evelyn found her solace in one of Arthur's doctors. Things turned ugly when Arthur got suspicious.
He was upset, but she was much more eager to spend time with the doctor. They'd take trips together, go out nature watching and so forth. Then it began to probe and to carry the suspicions that he had always harbored. Then it all came out, and she told him.
Things he would call Evelyn when he found out about the affair were just awful. But he said this is going to be an honest picture, and that's going to come through, I think.
The Inman Diary, a public and private confession.
This is just like a giant and rather unpleasant soap opera.
It really is, and from what we know is how things turned out. Evelyn lived for many years after Arthur.
Wow. And I can tell that you're as moved as I am. Who is this, and why do we care what he thought? Are we really scraping the World War II barrels and coming up with no-name cringe lords? Imagine shooting your face off in a filthy basement thinking some bitch would want to read your wank stories. What a wonderful gift from a Jewish editor, a diet of slut-effing filth set to the backdrop of World War II. Such a unique insight. All you people are racist, says Philip. Inman simply needed noise-canceling headphones and a Naxos music library subscription. These tapes would be podcast today or live streams with his mistresses. This guy killed it life better than millennial woes. Some Jews in the arts in the first half of the century, like Hugo von Hofmannsthal and Arnold Schoenberg, were Austrian patriots and monarchists bitterly opposed to socialism and democracy. Women are a mystery wrapped in a thong. Early modernism in literature was very much a reactionary project with T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, Evelyn Waugh, Yeats, Lawrence. Looked like a man on a mission. Wow, what a handsome dude. So you're gonna rush out and get this diary. Okay, let me gather my thoughts. So you're probably wondering, Luke, talk to us more about the good stuff, Enlarging America, the cultural work of Jewish literary scholars, 1930 to 1990 by Suzanne Klingenstein. The first Jewish literary scholars were integrated into East Coast Literary Academy as facsimile wasps. Had they been visible as Jews or written on Jewish topics, they would not have had academic careers. Having grown up in assimilated, well-off, non-religious households, they never lived intellectually or culturally or religiously as Jews. Hence, they had nothing to give up or to deny or to suppress when they entered Ivy League Academy and when they married non-Jews. So Thorsten Veblen's Aliens of the Uneasy Feet had in fact settled down and were explaining their country, America, to the descendants of old stock Americans. So many of these early Jewish English literature professors started teaching in American studies departments which just started springing up in the 1930s and 40s. So the Jews who cared to go into literary studies during the 1920s, 30s, and 40s in America had no intellectual interest in their Jewish heritage. They certainly were not religious. Some of them had parents who even denied being Jewish. One said, when people ask, are you Jewish? I don't know what to say. I say yes, because that's the answer they expect. I used to say at one point, well, my parents are. Then you are, they said. So I gave in. If you say I am, I am. It was an identification that did not mean much to me. So how do you describe people who don't like to be identified by their race or their religion? So they individualists, lovers of the Enlightenment, Americans. So I notice that Americans compared to Europeans have less interest in being identified with their race or religion. Generally speaking, they're much more individualistic. And people on the West Coast, compared to people on the East Coast, people on the West Coast have fewer ties, generally speaking, to ethnicity, race, and religion. The problem of how to define Jewishness biologically, ethnically, religiously, culturally, or intellectually became a major issue at one point in Nathan Gutman's academic career. Then he insisted on thinking about the problem Jewish identity in America and pursuing it to what appeared to him its logical and inevitable end, the disappearance of the Jews, speaks for his moral seriousness. But he did not seem to mourn such an end, embittered some American Jews, and had some rabbis up in arms against him. So this Professor Gutman developed an intense dislike of definitions of identity based on nationalism, tribalism, peoplehood, ethnicity, and so forth. So these are the people who tend to go into the academy, right? I don't think most people have an intense dislike of definitions based on nationalism, tribalism, peoplehood, ethnicity, and race. But to Professor Gutman, the only acceptable basis of identification was an individual's actions and abilities. But that's way too exhausting. We need to categorize people, right? This one's a Jew, this one's a Christian, this one's Catholic, this one's Anglican, this one's gay, this one's Muslim, this one's Arab, right? That's just how we work, because we don't have enough space and enough energy to categorize people as individuals. Generally speaking, we categorize people as members of groups. The right to create oneself and to choose that self-identity over a fated primary identity represented to this Professor Gutman the fulfillment of the Emersonian promise of freedom. Yeah, but it's a delusion. The world does not work this way. He observed that this was not a notion shared by the majority of Americans. In America, he realized you are identified as you are in other societies on the basis of your parents and grandparents by ascription rather than achievement. So what we're talking about here is a clash between descent culture and ascent culture. So ascent culture is individualistic, where everything has to be negotiated. So may I hold your hand? May I stroke your hair? May I give you a kiss on the lips? May I insert my tongue in your mouth? Right? You have to negotiate everything. When you go to do a deal, everything needs negotiation in an individualist society. But in a collectivist society, most of these things are taken for granted. It's just clear. If you're an Orthodox Jew, there's this way of life. If you're an Arab, this is what's expected of you. If you're Catholic or whatever group you belong to, that is the most prominent identifier of who you are. You are primarily a member of a group. That is descent society, and that's the traditional way that human beings have identified themselves, understood others, by descent. Now, the primary exception to descent society is Anglo-Saxon society, and that is ascent society, where people are individuals and interactions between them have to be negotiated. So in a collectivist society, most interactions don't have to be negotiated because you already take it for granted what's going to happen and what the rules are. So Professor Gutman felt he knew who he was, but he found it difficult to come up with a descriptive category that would satisfy others. I was very unsure what to say about myself because I was not observant of Jewish law. I'd never been bar mitzvahed. I had no belief whatsoever in Judaism. I didn't even know anything about it. When people asked me, are you Jewish? I didn't know what to say. So when Alan Gutman was 10 years old, the family moved from Chicago to Miami, where his father hoped a milder climate might improve his wife's health. So his father made a fundamental mistake that turned his son against him and became a source of substantial emotional and psychological distress. In Miami, Alan Gutman recorded, "My father tried to pass as a Methodist because it was very difficult for Jews to get jobs in certain areas. I was very upset by that even as a child. So they would say to me in school, 'You are Jewish, aren't you?' And my father ordered me to say no. I was upset about that. My father was too ignorant even to claim to be a Lutheran, which might have been plausible. When my mother died in 1947, my father had her buried with a Jewish ceremony. By that time, he had a job in Miami Beach, which was mostly Jewish. Then it was okay to be Jewish again. But I was angry at the humiliation at having to lie to my friends for years and then admitting the truth." And his sister moved to Florida in 1941, and she passed as a Gentile. She married a Gentile, and she asked her brother not to reveal that they were Jews. Okay. A little bit more here on Alan Gutman. So Alan Gutman serenely predicted the disappearance of Jews in America. He upheld the right to personal freedom and individual choice over the restraints imposed by a sense of inherited communal past. So he went for ascent community over descent community. So his work made many Jews angry. Professor Gutman noted it's an unrecognized fact that American Jews who reject the political status quo, meaning they're communists, leftists, also reject God and Torah and Talmud. Their radicalism has involved the abandonment, rather than the intensification of their faith in Judaism as a religion. The radicalism of Emma Goldman and a host of others is actually the exodus of those who rejected both Judaism and the political, economic, and religious orthodoxies of the society in which they lived. So with the collapse of political radicalism in the United States, the speed of that exodus slowed down, but Jews continued to voice their dissent. So people like Daniel Aaron, Daniel Bell, Saul Bellow, Herbert Gold, Paul Goodman, Irving Howe, Alfred Cousin, Norman Mailer, Leo Marx, Philip Rav, David Reisman, Philip Roth, J.D. Salinger, Morris Sheps, Harvey Swados, and Lionel Trilling, among the foremost and angriest critics of American minds, morals, and possibilities, all Jewish. But despite their Jewish backgrounds, none of these men is noted for affirmation of Judaism. Since their radical and political values could hardly be defined as Jewish values, Gutman asked by what right and reason these men are pressed into service as Jews. If one wanted to see them within a specific tradition, it must be the tradition of dissent and alienation outlined in Thorsten Veblen's essay, The Intellectual Preeminence of Jews in Modern Europe. All other efforts to enlist these intellectuals as Jews were doomed to fail. So, judging the future by the past, Gutman expected the Jews to disappear. In 1962, while working on his book, The Conservative Tradition in America, Alan Gutman was invited to give a talk on Jewish literature at the Jewish Student Organization of the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. He accepted. He went to one of the talks in the series to find out what was expected of him. He was put off by the speaker's adulation of Bernard Malamud and Philip Roth. It's a very positive presentation, how wonderful these writers were. These are our Jewish writers, and aren't they just wonderful? Aren't they super fine? Just fabulous. That approach did not appeal to me. It seemed uncritical, as if the purpose were not to understand Roth and Malamud, but to celebrate Jewishness. Alan Gutman sensed group coercion and dug in his heels. Research for his own presentation revealed what minimal identification most American Jewish writers had with Judaism. Gutman did not hesitate to point out this unwelcome fact in his talk, Jewish Radicals, Jewish Writers. Gutman asserted that the political radicalism of the American Jew had been misunderstood, that pretty much all American Jewish radicals had only minimal connection to anything Jewish. It is plain even to a timid Jeremiah that the extraordinary post-war outbursts of literary dissent as an identifiably Jewish renaissance will be short-lived as the now defunct tradition of foreign language political radicalism. So he predicts the disappearance of the Jews in America. Morris Cohen here, the Jewish philosopher, had a great line: no change of ideology can make a man cease to be the son of his parents. So I think I know what you're wondering right now. You were thinking about, how do I know what is appropriate to talk about in therapy? Like, what do I say?
Hey everybody, happy Wednesday. And like I mentioned yesterday, for 2 items or more, they've offered free shipping. And I believe it's shipping for free, which can really save in Westwood. And it's going to be coming up. It's in the, if you're in that range and you're in junior day, I think it's like the 19th. So let's get going. So the first question says, hey Katie, I've come so far in my recovery from self-harm and suicidal ideation, but within the last week I have slipped back into hearing the negative self-harm and suicidal ideation voices in my head. It's debilitating. It's distracting, and I don't have any time to miss work now that I have a real job. I don't want to fall back into the darkness that I was in last year. So what's your advice? Now, this happens to all of us. First, I want you all to know that struggling and kind of, peaking and waning and feeling like, oh, I'm doing great in my recovery, and then all of a sudden the urges come back is very normal. It can be many different reasons why it's happening. It could be the holidays, it could be the weather outside, it could be stressful situations around family or friends or money or any number of things that can make us just more stressed, not sleeping as well. It kind of brings our, not just immune system, but kind of like our emotional immune system down, and makes it harder for us to stop those urges from coming up and the thoughts from coming back. And so when this happens, what do? Now, I deal with this a lot with my clients, and the thing I always say is, what's in your toolbox? What worked before? Let's grab it. Let's pull it out. Let's get it together. Let's start using our tools, because the thing that happens most often is when we're really doing well, we don't really do anything to keep up our wellness. We're not taking care of our mind and our body, and we kind of let things slip because things are okay, and we don't think about it all the time, so therefore, we're not thinking of how to take care of ourselves like we were, and remembering to journal like we were, remembering to reach out and vent about things that are going on like we used to. So I would encourage you to remember what worked before and put it back into play. We have to make sure that we're doing it regularly. Keeping up our healthy mind and healthy body is something we have to do every day. And I know that's really annoying. It sounds like a lot of work, but it's just, we're investing in ourselves. We're investing in bettering ourselves and helping ourselves get through some of the shitty, hard times. So that would be my number one word of advice. The second thing that I would offer in the same kind of vein as that is reaching out for extra support, joining a group, getting back in therapy, calling your therapist, anything like that to make sure that you have extra support, even talking to your friends and making sure you have plans to get together with them. Maybe it's isolation that's making it worse. We need to kind of make sure we have all the support that we can possibly get, and then we're going to use our tools, okay? And if any of you have tools and tips and tricks that have helped you get out of this, can you let us know below? Because the more we share, the more we all benefit, right? Okay, now the second question that I have is, hey Katie, you mentioned in this video that one of your clients gave you a gift. What kind of things are appropriate to give your therapist, and at what times? Thanks. Now, I wanted to talk about this because the holidays are coming up, and I've heard from many of you that you like to give cards or gifts, and you don't know what's appropriate to give a therapist. Honestly, as long as it is a small, thoughtful gift, I think it's fine. Usually clients give me gifts after maybe they've come back from vacation, and they're like, oh, I saw this cute little thing and I thought about you, and I'll put it and keep it in my office so that it's kind of, they know that I liked it and it's part of our therapy, and they'll see it every time, and it can kind of be a good, we call them like transitional objects and stuff as people are moving through stuff. It can be something that's always there.
Wait, where the hell is my audience gone? I've only got 7 people watching on YouTube. That's outrageous. This is quality content. Where did you all go? Where is everyone? How do we get them back here?
Cards are great. Just anything it's not worth a lot. Don't try giving your therapist a huge gift that's really expensive, like a $200 cashmere sweater or something like that, because we can't accept that. Ethically, it puts us in a bizarre situation. But anything that's just thoughtful, maybe something you made, you could bring desserts, you could bring, like I said, any kind of card or anything you made is great. And that's what I actually received, was something that my client had worked on and made. And so I thought it was really cool. And so obviously I'll accept it. It was great. So that gives you an idea. Something that isn't worth a ton, but it means a lot emotionally for you. That's what I would go with. And you can give them around the holidays. You can give them around different anniversaries in your treatment, pretty much anytime you really want to. But like I said, just remember that we're not supposed to be receiving gifts all the time as therapists. That's not really what we do. So, just make sure it means something to you, and you can do it when you feel like it, okay? Question number 3. Hey, Katie, how do you decide which topics are most important to bring up during your therapy appointment when life just seems so overwhelming? I've made lists, but sometimes we don't even get halfway through the list by my next appointment, and I've got all new things to talk about when we haven't even touched on the stuff from the last time. I hope this makes sense. How do I decide what's the most pressing issue? Thanks for all that you do. Now, this got a lot of chatter on the website, and a lot of people are like, me too, I struggle with this, me too, oh my God, I don't know either. Now, when I first read this, my little radar went up, boom, and I was like, this person needs therapy more frequently. And that's the basis, the foundation of what I would tell a client of mine. I would try to find another way to work them in my schedule so I see them twice a week. Hoping that that's a possibility for you. That's what I would try to do, because when therapy sessions feel so far apart and there's so much that goes on in between, and there's never...
For years, I would have back-to-back therapy sessions, so I had 90 minutes, and I could bring up everything.
Enough time in a session, talk about it all. We want to make sure we get more time in therapy if possible. I know it's not always a perfect world. We can't always get that when we need it, but please, please, please try to. If you can book double sessions, do that. If you can book twice a week, do that. Get it to a point where you feel like it's manageable each time you see them, because that's what therapy should feel like. Otherwise, you're not really getting your needs met, okay? Now, the second thing, the list is a great idea, but I would focus more on, I would journal like I always say, I know it's annoying, but I promise it works. I would start journaling every night about what's going on. And before you go to therapy, I would read through your journal, and that would help. It helps you see what's been going on and what you've talked about the most, because you'll see in your journal if there's like a vein of discussion that you keep bringing up, like, and that test is coming up, it's really stressing me out, or and that stupid boy has been really bugging me, or that breakup I was going through, or I'm really struggling with my self-harm urges, or whatever it is. You'll see the vein of it running through every one of your journal entries. And so journaling really helps us keep a pulse on what's going on in our life and emotionally how we're doing. And then right before session, we can read through it and kind of see what's going on. And that will help us decide what the most pressing issue is. Now, the third and final option that I will give is I do this with some of my clients. If, let's say, I don't have room in my schedule to see them twice a week, or they can't afford to see me twice a week, I will offer up the ability for them to email me, knowing very well I will not answer. I don't respond to emails from my clients unless it's a pressing issue, but it gives them an outlet so they can talk about things. And then that reminds me, so I bring up the biggest issue that I feel is happening, and it can help us go from there and help us continue to move forward. And it gives them an outlet in between sessions where they can actually express what's going on and what they're struggling with. So I hope that one of those options works for you and something that you're able to implement into your own treatment. And if anybody else has any tips and tricks, let us know, okay? Now, journal topic, thanks, Jill. She sent this a while ago, but I always research for them, and I look through all of, like I said, I read everything. And so.
Okay, I got to bring the viewers back. I've got to bring back the high quality pulsating content that just compels people to pay attention, to just bring them flooding back into YouTube and to DLive and everywhere where we're sharing the gospel right now. So let's talk about philology. So philology. This is the branch of knowledge that deals with the structure, historical development, and relationships of a language. Okay, it's the study of language in oral and written historical sources. It is the intersection of textual criticism, literary criticism, history, and linguistics.
Philology.
Okay, so a philologist at Harvard is named Leo Wiener, one of the first tenured Jewish professors in language at a major American university. So he started teaching at Harvard in the 1890s. And his first book was The History of Yiddish Literature in the 19th Century. And so this guy, Leo Wiener, is an advocate of assimilation on the national as well as on the international level, of what he called the liberal humanism and secular idealism, which characterized the best minds of Europe in the late 19th century. So he wasn't an advocate of cultural pluralism. He was an advocate, essentially, of Enlightenment-style Anglo-Saxon culture. So his politics and his psychological needs, as you would expect, kind of ran together. So a lot of people, I think, choose their politics out of psychological need, that they have some anxiety going on inside of them that they want to read into wider society. So this guy, Leo Wiener, was restless, discontented, and lacked patience with those around him. His own interpretation of his difficulties reflects his confusion of psychology and politics. He claimed that the friction was the result of an arrogant insistence on the part of the Jewish organizations that a Jew was a Jew before he was a man, and that he owed inalienable allegiance to his own group before humanity itself. So this widespread belief among many non-Jews that Jews are a unified group who put their Jewish identity first. Well, some Jews do, but many Jews don't. In the United States of America, a third of American Jews don't care at all about the Jewish state of Israel. Another third only care mildly. Then about a third are strongly dedicated to the Jewish state of Israel. So most American Jews care very little about the Jewish state of Israel. So somehow many non-Jews think that every American Jew is just dedicated to Israel. The opposite is true. Most American Jews don't care about Israel. Most American Jews don't care that much about the Jewish identity. They don't put being Jewish or Judaism number one, number two, number three in their list of priorities. Why would I say that? Well, about 70% of American Jews marry non-Jews. So if 2/3 of the people marry non-Jews, it's not because they put their Jewish identity first. Nobody who puts his Jewish identity first marries a non-Jew. Is Christianity kaput? No, I don't think Christianity is kaput. I think there's a lot of life. Do Jews care about manhood? Yes. traditional Jews in particular have separate roles for men and women. So by and large, in Orthodox Judaism, men and women don't socialize. Men hang out with men, women hang out with men. Women hang out with women, men hang out with men. So Leo Wiener, this Harvard University professor of philology, was opposed to the separate existence of Jews within another nation, and he was also opposed to Jews forming a separate state. He worried about the superimposition of a Jewish colony upon a Muslim background. He insisted that the future of the Jews in the newer countries lay in their identifying their interests with those of the country, not in opening the wound of a separate new nationalism. And the newer countries he refers to here, countries like Australia and the United States. So Leo Wiener, like most of these early Jewish professors of language, preferred consent society to descent society. So consent is where everything is negotiated, where people are treated as individuals. Leo Wiener tried hard to overcome his descent, his group identity as a Jew, in the freedom of America. Did not recognize that to many around him, America was merely an idea and not a reality. He reacted to the psychological pressures that his displacement created. He grew up in Europe, moved all around before he ended up at Harvard the last half of his life. Tried to root himself firmly in the ground, in America's welcoming soil, and in the realm he shared with all mankind, language. So he found an idiosyncratic solution to the problems of deracination and cultural incoherence in his life. That is the achievement of a safe space in the realm of language. And this is from Susan Klingenstein's excellent book, Jews in the American Academy, 1900 to 1940. So what you probably want to talk about right now is the fascinating topic of psychoanalysis and literature.
Oedipus complex. That is to say, I don't think he thought Oedipus had an Oedipus complex. I think this was a drama, and that in a way we have to imagine that when we're seeing this drama, the people on stage are going through it for the first time. I think what we, or the post-Freudian people, think of as the Oedipus complex is a well-rehearsed predicament. It's almost like a cliché, that it's like a tag we have as a constitutive myth of the origin of our lives and the base of our history. So I think it is misleading to think of Sophocles as being Freudian.
Well, can we get to the root of what you think he thought he was saying? You have the son kills the father, sleeps with the mother, and so on. So what does he think he's saying? Is he saying, this is a drama, this will stir my viewers, this will call up the incantations that I believe are sacred? You don't think he's speaking to a condition deeply basic in human life that Freud later described in other terms?
Well, he may be, but I think there's a risk of appropriating the past to make it too contemporary in a way. That in order to understand, it's as though there's two things we could do. On the one hand, we could psychoanalyze early works of literature. And the risk is then the past is not a foreign country. It becomes simply seamless with the present. On the other hand, we would need to reconstruct the culture that this play came out of. And then we'd be imaginatively trying to work out exactly how this was being received and where it was coming from. Now, for people like us, it's as though we're assuming that everybody in some sense is recognising they've got an Oedipus complex, and therefore the drama is sort of integral to their lives. I imagine that differently. That is to say, the original audiences for this particular play were experiencing something, as it were, cosmological. Were experiencing something about their place in the universe. They were not exactly thinking about mothers and fathers. They were thinking about mothers and fathers in the context of a whole cosmology.
Let's turn, Malcolm Bowie, to another pillar of literature. Shakespeare, do you think in his use of the soliloquy, he's exposing the unconsciousness of the individual? Do you see the unconscious in any Freudian sense being used then? And do you think Shakespeare himself, the same questions I asked Anna Phillips, do you think Shakespeare himself was aware of the unconscious in that way?
Shakespeare, certainly in Hamlet's soliloquies and in numerous places elsewhere, is riddling and quibbling and playing on ambiguities, multiple meanings, and to that extent begins to sound like a fairly orthodox practitioner of a certain sort of psychoanalysis. One of the golden rules of psychoanalysis, as we know, is say the first thing that comes into your head, and let's see where that takes us. And the dialogue between clinician and patient is constructed often in terms of what look like adventitious discoveries, merely chance things that occur, at the turning of a sentence between this syllable and the next. And Freud is certainly of the view that this reveals such slips, such incongruities within language reveal something of the unconscious. And Shakespeare certainly seems to have been there before him, as do numerous other poets who riddle and quibble and play with words.
But do you think when Shakespeare was writing those soliloquies, do you think that he had an idea that he was mining a part of his intelligence which was not available in other ways? I'm over-elaborating, saying, do you think that he thought that there was an unconscious there that he was revealing through soliloquy?
I don't know that he needed the concept of the unconscious. Writing like that, as multidimensionally as that, playing on so many different linguistic keyboards at once, in a sense the unconscious comes free as part of that investment in language and that sense of imaginative adventure as one explores the powers of language. So the concept of the unconscious seems a latter-day affair, something that Western culture needs when it gets into a certain condition of crisis or a certain condition of anxious self-reflection. But at a time of tremendous linguistic and dramatic confidence, and one might point also to the period of Chaucer, Boccaccio, Dante, shall we say, the concept of the unconscious, although it's a modern fad for us, seems strangely irrelevant to the business of putting literary works together.
Please open your...
Okay, so is intelligence overrated? Political scientist Johnny Anomaly has a blog post here. When we think about who we want to be friends with or what qualities we appreciate in a romantic partner, intelligence is probably not the first thing we think about. We value kindness, we value loyalty, creativity, beauty, courage, many other traits. And intelligence can be a negative trait. A smart psychopath makes it more dangerous than a dim one. Still, most people are attracted to traits that require intelligence. So, empathy. Empathy is the ability to place yourself in somebody else's shoes. What is the quality that measures empathy? It is abstract thought. It requires abstract thought for me to put myself in your shoes. Is there a measurement of our capacity for abstract thought? Well, now that you mention it, there is. IQ measures our capacity for abstract thought. So intelligence, IQ, essentially measure our ability to be empathetic. We can't expect stupid people to have very much empathy. Now, a smart person does not have to use his empathy. He does not have to act on his empathy. But only smart people have the capacity for extensive empathy. So most people are attracted to traits that require intelligence, such as empathy, a sense of humor. Anyone who's funny is smart. You can't be funny and dumb. Also, intelligence shows that you're more likely to have the ability to solve practical problems, such as, oh, why is the water taking so long to go down the drain? Well, a smart person can open up the drain and he can see if there's anything blocking the drain, or he can pull out the plunger, he can plunge it, he can pour like declogging fluids down there, right? A smarter person is going to have greater ability to solve practical problems. And whatever people say they value in children, when they have a choice, such as when lesbian couples shop for sperm donors, they generally want smart children. So these preferences reflect an intuitive sense of the value of intelligence for individual welfare. Large body research shows that intelligence positively correlates with many life outcomes we value, such as health, longevity, income, education, even the likelihood that we will have stable romantic relationships. Much of this is due to patience, self-control, and other traits that correlate with intelligence. Intelligent people are more likely to be patient. Intelligent people are more likely to have self-control. Intelligent people are more likely to be law-abiding. Intelligent people are more likely to contribute more in taxes than they take out in social welfare. So intelligence predicts many important life outcomes, and intelligence is highly heritable, something like 0.8 or 80%. Now, many academics downplay the importance of intelligence for ideological reasons. One reason may be that if our intellectual capacities are deeply constrained by our genetic endowment, egalitarian hopes of using schooling to achieve equal outcomes will be doomed to fail. Self-identified progressives and liberals are especially likely to deny evidence that intelligence is highly heritable. The high heritability of intelligence has important social implications that have mostly been ignored by academics, such as social scientists, and also by journalists. In his book Hive Mind, Garrett Jones, a professor of psychology, summarizes the literature showing a correlation between intelligence, patience, and the propensity to cooperate in group settings. So intelligent people are more likely than less intelligent people to seek win-win solutions. So smarter people tend to play a conditionally cooperative strategy in repeated prisoners' dilemmas. So the more intelligent a person is, the more likely they are to seek out win-win solutions. Intelligent people seek out partners who are disposed to cooperate and who have longer time horizons. So intelligent people, the future is more clear to them, and so they have a lower time preference. They don't need to have things right now. They are prepared to wait. The people who have patience, people who are predisposed to cooperate, people who are law-abiding, these people are the type of people you want in your life. So intelligent people find ways of cementing their relationships with others. Life is full of situations in which there are advantages to reciprocity, but incentives for each person to act in a way that increases immediate benefits at the expense of future opportunities. Working on team projects and sharing the benefits, looking after the neighbor's pets while they are away, giving up a little in this month's political battle, because that's better than raising the probability of a low-grade civil war. Well, these are examples of cooperation based on long-range, long-run reciprocity, which helps make the group better off, even if the individual has to pay a short-run cost. That more intelligent people are generally more cooperative, and they have more patience, and they get along better with other people. So one of the best predictors to how pleasant your life will be is what's the average level of the intelligence around you. You want to live around people who are as smart as possible, because they are much more likely to cooperate, to be patient, and to have empathy. And as soon as we can start fine-tuning our fetuses, people are going to start fine-tuning them for intelligence. So cognitive enhancement is effectively a form of moral enhancement. So not all smart people are moral, but smarter people have greater capacity for thinking morally. Empathy is essentially a shorthand for morality. So smart people don't necessarily have better moral motivations, but they are better able to foster the kinds of cooperation that makes everybody in a group better off. And even if smarter people don't have better motivations, groups of smart people tend to create the conditions for social welfare to improve. So if you drop your wallet, you're more likely to have it returned to you in Beverly Hills or Bel Air than in Compton. So smart people create the conditions for social welfare to improve. So the number one important thing for a thriving, flourishing economy is what is the intelligence level of your top 5%. So California has a ton of dummies, but it has a very high top 5% cognitively, like a big, thick slice of geniuses in the top 5% of California's population. And so California's economy is thriving because we have such a number of geniuses. So as genetic testing and reproductive technology improve, many parents will ignore the pundits and seek to enhance their children's intelligence. The old-fashioned way to do this is through mate selection, but other people will select embryos for intelligence using polygenic scores along with other traits. Intelligence is good for individuals and for groups. The more intelligence is, the better, generally speaking, within the normal range of current human abilities.
Yeah, so what's your take on that?
Well, I think Shakespeare was certainly aware that there were many things he wasn't aware of, and possibly not even aware of them as he was writing them. A lot of the work is about, there are more things in man and the universe and so on than we are aware of. So in that sense, one could say, yes, Shakespeare was aware that there were things around and working through him that he wasn't always in complete control of. Certainly his characters are like that, and I don't think we have to do a lot of work, and I don't think we have to use the word unconscious to see unawareness in them. Moments of darkness, moments that are close to them, dreams. So yes, why not? Although I think it's very, very hard for us as late 20th and early 21st century beings to think ourselves out of the Freudian carapace, really, or take off Freudian spectacles, because they're so permeated. So
Okay, let's look at the chat. Luke, blue states doing worse than red states economically, and California's bottom 10 on every social indicator. Okay, so most of America's economy is in the blue states. So where is the future created is created in blue states such as California. Future is created primarily in places like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York. Now, when you create a thriving economy, it attracts all sorts of losers who come in to suck, on the social welfare teat. But most innovations in technology and medicine, they happen in places like Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York City. Latest dissident book that's making the rounds on dissident Twitter is Scott Howard's Transgender Industrial Complex.
So many of our ways of thinking, so many of our inflections about the way in which we grow and develop and become who we are.
Guys!
That even if we're not aware of it, I think we end up in some ways perhaps being 20th century beings and therefore Freudian.
But is there a sense in which, following on from what Malcolm said, if Shakespeare and Sophocles delivered everything that they could deliver and delivered what we can now call the unconscious,
Guys,
is the unconscious a late
even comedians were doing this all the time.
invention?
So everyone's mad about grabbing by the pussy, and it's like, okay, I can see, but how do you even grab someone by the... Okay. And you're going, what do you mean, how do you grab them? You grab them. How do you grab a pencil? I don't know, I can't explain it. But like a pencil. I don't know, my fingers here, my thumbs there, it's a grab!
They're saying it was Sarah Tiana.
Sarah Tiana was the girl, and
Thanks, Woodward.
Russell went up to her and he grabbed... To me, a vagina is a chunk. And you go like this, and it's a grab, and it's a little... What would you even call it? Just, you grab it. So they couldn't believe it, and I couldn't believe when I saw Russell Peters. He did that, he grabbed her, and it was a Me Too. It was right when this Me Too movement was taking hold, I believe. Maybe. All right, we're going to watch Joe Rogan's stream this year. Quite the downgrade. He had on, Lex Fridman's not going to like this, he had on Kyle Klawinski. Am I saying that right?
Kyle Kalinske.
Kyle Kalinske. You're going, who's that? It's a Lex Fridman style JRE guest who, again, never really had that much credentials, but Joe Rogan gets confused on who's one of the main guys and who's just a bottom feeder of this scene. So, like, in Joe Rogan's mind, Joe Rogan doesn't know the difference between Jordan Peterson and Tim Pool. He doesn't. He thinks they're both, I don't know, he thinks they're both equal. Now, Jules, who would you rank? Jordan Peterson, who's like a bigger get? Jordan Peterson or Tim Pool?
Jordan Peterson?
Yes. So you like Joe, don't know.
I mean, those two, if you were saying Jordan Peterson at the height of his popularity, then for sure, but right at this moment.
Stop.
Okay, there's a question in the chat. Luke, any advice on how we can make ourselves more hateful and hard-hearted? Well, there are very few situations in life where your life will be improved by becoming more hateful and hard-hearted. So if you are fighting for your life in a dark alley, being more hateful and hard-hearted will serve you. Aside from these very rare instances, it simply won't serve you. You won't be happier. You won't be more effective. Now, on the other hand, is having zero resentment or zero fear, zero negative sentiments towards our group, is that ideal for your own well-being? No, I wouldn't argue that either. So a certain low level of suspicion, resentment, fear, antipathy towards outgroups, a certain low level of that serves you. But if that low level of resentment and fear against outgroups climbs too high, it starts becoming maladaptive. So all sorts of traits are adaptive initially. So let's take daydreaming. So a little bit of daydreaming, it can get you through boring times. It can make time pass more pleasantly when you're having to do mundane tasks. But if you get into the habit of daydreaming when you should be paying attention, then a trait that starts out as adaptive becomes maladaptive. So if you're fighting for your life, then being angry and hard-hearted is going to serve you. But in few instances in life will being angry and hard-hearted serve you. Luke, there is no compassion in this world. That's nonsense. There is a ton of compassion in this world. Just look at this chat. This chat is filled with love and inclusion. Nobody likes outgroups or people lower than them. There is no love in this world. I am doomed to low status life, so I must be grand and fierce. This is a delusion. You are not doomed. You have God. I presume you have friends. I presume that you have communities that you can join and you can contribute. How can I stop caring about other people? If you stop caring about other people, that would be a disaster. How on earth would stopping caring about other people serve you? I love others, but the world will never love me. Why don't you give yourself the love that you're longing for? I had a sponsee tell me, oh, I wish my sister would treat me with respect. So I suggested to him, how about you start treating yourself with respect? I had a sponsee who said, no, I wish my husband would care about my feelings. Well, how about you start caring about your feelings? I have a sponsee who says, I wish other students admired me. Well, how about you start admiring you? I wish my mother would pay attention to me. How about you start paying attention to you? I wish I had a girlfriend who cared about my feelings. How about you take time every day, write in your journal, and you track your feelings? How about you track your feelings through the day? You start out, you wake up, you feel groggy. And then half an hour later, you feel excited. And then later you feel afraid. And then you feel bored. Why don't you track your feelings? Why don't you care about your feelings? Why don't you care about your welfare? Why don't you have respect for the things that you're doing that are worthy of respect? Why don't you give yourself the admiration that you want other people to give you for the things that you are doing that are worthy of admiration? So instead of yearning for, why don't people at synagogue care about me? Why don't you care about you? And do you care about anyone at synagogue? Like all those things that you want other people to give you. You want other people to give you compassion. Why don't you sit down, pull out your journal, and give yourself compassion? It's like, James, I recognize that I have certain health limitations. You have been given a difficult lot in life. Give yourself compassion for the difficult lot that you have in life. So whatever it is that you want, give it to yourself. Look, I've never had a single friend in my life that wasn't forced. How about you become a friend to yourself? How about you start speaking kindly to yourself? How about you start writing in your journal and writing to yourself as a friend? How about you start becoming a good friend to yourself? How about you start to let go of your compulsion to beat yourself down and to pressure yourself and to abuse yourself?
Well, Saturday, I was out with a girl on a first date, and the beginning, like the first half hour or whatever, it was going pretty well. Like not amazing, but it was pretty good. And then a half hour in, I mentioned to her that I had just leased a BMW, and started talking about that. And as I'm talking about it, in my head I'm thinking, oh my God, you're such an idiot. That sounded so arrogant. She's going to think that you're trying to impress her by dropping, what car you drive and, just all that.
So it was going well, and then you mentioned something, and you started coming at yourself pretty hard. How did it go after, or from there? How'd the rest of the night go?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like I sort of shut down a little bit after that.
Did she say anything about it, or was it just kind of like your own internal judgment?
No, she didn't say anything, but,
it's hard to feel good about yourself when you're coming at yourself in that way. It's hard to feel good about yourself even like on a date, like a good version of yourself when you're coming at yourself so harshly.
And James says, look, we Jews will be destroyed by the soulless Asian overclass. Why do you say that? We've been around for 4,000 years. There's no reason to believe that we're going to be destroyed. Not going to be destroyed by women taking testosterone and wising up to men. Say, my chances in life are terrible. How do you know? You're still alive. Where there's life, there's hope. You say, I've just got 0.75 kidneys. Well, have compassion for yourself. Be kind to yourself. Isn't there anything that you enjoy doing? Do you enjoy reading? Do you enjoy writing? Do you enjoy painting? Do you enjoy listening to music? Do you enjoy watching movies? Why don't you do all the things that you love to do that are not destructive to yourself? Aren't there things in life that you value? Is it possible not to have any psychological defense mechanisms? No, but it is possible to reduce the intensity with which they kick in. But whatever it is you're yearning for other people to give to you, learn to give it to yourself.
I have a really hard time opening up, period, but opening up to someone I've never spoken to before. Well, I mean once, but that's even harder.
Yeah, so there's like a vulnerability thing.
Absolutely.
Do you find it hard to make yourself vulnerable right now as we're talking about this?
Yeah, kind of. And then it's frustrating, and I get mad about it because I feel like this is a really cool opportunity.
It makes sense to me that you would have a hard time making yourself vulnerable right now. You know, even the way that you just treated yourself, it was like you're having a hard time making yourself vulnerable because there's other people listening on the call, because you've never talked to me before. Look at the way you respond to that. You say, what's wrong with you? You're wasting an opportunity. Instead of, being understanding and forgiving the fact that your guard is up right now.
I don't want it to be.
I know, but it is. That's okay. It's hard for you to make yourself vulnerable right now. So look at the way you come at yourself. You say, what's wrong with you? This is an opportunity. You're wasting it. That's not treating yourself with unconditional love. Taking a stance of, hey, listen, it makes sense that it would be hard for you to put your guard down right now, given the circumstances. And that's okay. And you're okay. Do you hear the difference in those two takes?
Yeah.
Does it sound like it would be nice if you were treated like that throughout the day?
I wouldn't ever get anything done.
What do you mean?
Well, I kind of feel like cracking the whip is how you get stuff done,
Right. So you may be thinking, I want to be sucked off by hot girls. Like Ron Jeremy right now, he's in jail, facing trial. And it's probably not so easy to, smuggle hot chicks in. Or you can learn to do that for yourself. Ron Jeremy can suck himself off, and so can you. Suck yourself off, bro. Don't just wait for, young women to do it. You can do that for yourself. You don't need hot girls. You can give yourself the love, attention, the adoration that you want young women to give to you. You just need a little bit of flexibility. Just need to open your mind. Just pull it out right now and do it. Open your mind, open your mouth, and give yourself the love that you want hot young women to give to you.
What are some of the things that you find yourself worrying about?
Well, I mean, anything. I'll think, are these symptoms ever going to go away? And am I doing everything I need to? Even when I learned about meditating, which I know is supposed to be a good thing and helpful, even when I'm meditating, I'm thinking, am I doing this right? Or am I doing it long enough? Is it really going to help? And that's not what I'm supposed to be thinking while I'm meditating.
But it sounds like these thoughts are just relentless.
Yeah.
It's like there's this tyrant in your head that is constantly terrifying you with anything it can, with any ammunition that it could get its hands on.
You never know.
Well, maybe Tim Pool could drum up
he's
more
got a lot
listeners.
Of
That's maybe a better example.
Out there.
Jordan Peterson or Kyle Kowinski, who's a bigger...
Jordan Peterson.
Yes. Joe Rogan thinks all these guys are equally badass. He thinks like Kyle Kowinski, Dave Rubin, Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson. He thinks this is like Mount Rushmore of current day. And he sees them all as equals. One's the penny, one's the nickel, one's the dime, one's the quarter. But you know what? It's a nice chunk of change to Joe Rogan. He doesn't know any of the difference. And this Kyle Kowinski, wait till you see him. He's exactly like Lex Friedman. He's another one of these Adderall autists that does nothing, and he just speaks about all these issues that are going on, like political. Like, if you go, Mike, what does Lex Fridman do? I don't know. He's involved in issues where some people think someone's a racist, but they're really not. He gets into that territory where he's defensive about that. That's what these guys are. They're not intellectuals. They're trans topic arguers. That's what they are. Professional trans topic culture arguers, but they like to pick the same topic for 3 or 4 years and discuss this. Sam Harris is another one. Hey, Sam Harris, do you know, what topics do you know? Well, trans people in bathrooms, college campuses becoming PC, and what's another? What's another one? The Gad Sad is another one of these guys. Guys, you need to evolve. Get a new topic. You turn on Gad Sad interview from 2 days ago, and he's like, did you know that college campuses are breeding grounds for PC? Okay, well, what do we do? Cut to 5 years later. What do we do? Well, let's just say, I will be drinking liberal tears because these guys are stupid, right? We're smart, they're stupid because they're PC. We're not. So they're dumb and we're smart. Okay, we know all their stories now. What about, do you have any plans?
Now?
Well, I want to repeat the stories. So college campuses are going. That's Gad Sad, everybody. A perfect impression of him, by the way. If you know him, that's my father. He's Greek. So we're going to show you Joe Rogan's stream. Boy, was this dark. No, Darnell Rawlings wasn't there. It was a dark stream. He lowered the lights. Not what I want for my election night stream. Let's dig in to the powerful one. JR, if you take the poll. JR Retard. Here he comes. Welcome him to the stage. Whoa. Okay, we're paused here. I've never seen this. Joe Rogan starting with a wide shot. Don't mind if I do. So you've got Joe Rogan, the booty gorilla humanzy. And can we pull up that clip of somebody saying that they couldn't believe how short? I'm so sorry. Gross. Let's play that first. Guys, we got some great stuff for you here today. The show, this is just starting. We're starting the show. Joe Rogan was called out, and, you know, never has a man's height been the topic for everybody, and everyone gets so excited talking about Joe Rogan's height, and they have for years. You know, 5 years ago when Joe Rogan first started getting recognized, people would go, oh, I love him. Can we talk about his height a little bit on the sneak? And everyone gets a big kick out of what? Discussing Rogan's height. A lot of people go, you know, he claims he's 5'8", all right? But then you see people that are 5'8" taking pictures with him. They're towering above him, and you're going, wait. Kanye West is a hard 5'8". I saw someone say this. Joe Rogan's in the picture 5 inches shorter than him. So Joe Rogan must be 5'some". I want to show you this. This Joe Rogan height stuff. I mean, I've been covering Rogan since the 60s, and the height stuff every year is still at its peak. Watch this. What time do I go to here?
Oh, I thought it was time to, I think it's 23:21.
23:21. Wait till you see this. And what are we watching, Jules?
I don't know, some MMA show.
Okay,
Morning Combat.
Yeah, so here you go. Morning Combat. Room Service Diaries. With Davis, Santa Cruz, we're back. Oh, Morning Combat. Okay. These guys know and love MMA. I'm not sure who they are. Doesn't matter. They're sure who Joe is. They've met him. Listen to what these two guys say about Joe in 2020. And they're not Owen Benjamin fans. Although, here.
Like 6 countries and
listen to this.
The hair you were
Here's what I'll say about Joe. And he's a real nice guy. I met him in person a couple times. He's really short. And you don't
what the? Here's what I'll say about Joe. I've met him in person many times. He's really short. Now, this was so out of context. They were talking about the mind, the personality of the guy, not the looks. So with Joe Rogan, he's the only man that every person that meets him eventually succumbs to the, he's pretty short. Like even his, this is Dr. Jordan Peterson. Joe Rogan, I know him very well. Why? And they're like, anything you noticed about him? And he's like, he's so short. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like even Dr. Peterson. They all get like a little cute kick out of him being short. Like who's another really serious guest who would never call him short? Bernie Sanders? Bernie Sanders, how was it being on Joe Rogan? Oh, no. But he's so short, he's like a midget. He's not that. You know, everyone gets a kick out of talking about the height. I love this. Let's listen.
And all the hip-hop stuff, you don't know anything about that either. So
here comes
that one.
You're gonna love this.
Dude, Joe Rogan's fucking new house is huge. Look at this shit.
That's what isn't huge.
You should go on a show one day. Maybe
eventually.
So look.
Good Lord, this motherfucker is living large.
Well, dude, he got like a $4 billion from...
they gave him like 6 countries and...
Haterade.
The hair on you were
Here's what I'll say about Joe.
So wait. They bring up that Joe Rogan's rich now, and that he bought a huge house. But...
It's Dinesh D'Souza sitting in for Dennis Prager, the third hour of the Dennis Prager Show. 1-8-Prager-776, 1-877-243-7776. I wonder as we peek over our shoulder into 2021, what path, if any, is available to Trump to press his case forward? Frankly, for me, I see only one, and it is in Trump's own hands to take it, or whether to take it. I've been watching Trump in recent days fulminating, and I think with some justice, against the court and against wayward Republicans and against the media, all of whom appear to be ducking the issue of taking command, you may say, of the situation. But what about Trump himself? Sidney Powell, in meeting with Trump recently, evidently made the case to Trump that Trump has the power under existing law. There's no need for some emergency declaration. There's no need for martial law. There's no need to overthrow the Constitution. There's no need, as Lincoln did, to suspend habeas corpus. None of that. That Trump has the presidential authority now to seize control of the voting machines, seize control to the degree that he can of the ballots, and have them looked at, have them audited, have them examined to see, are these machines that are programmable to switch votes? Are these machines that can be plugged into the internet and vote tabulations interfered with or altered? It seems to me that if something like this is not done, and we go into a Biden inauguration while never knowing, while never having the case even aired as to whether or not there was widespread election fraud, I mean, it seems indubitable to me that there was fraud. I listened to the hearings coming out of Pennsylvania, coming out of Michigan, coming out of Arizona. What actually struck me was the eerie similarity in the shenanigans described in all these cases. And of course, what that suggests is that these shenanigans are not independent of each other. It's not that all these counties decided on their own to do exactly the same things. In some ways, this is analogous to what happened with the deep state and Obama. In other words, when it came to targeting Trump and Trump's allies like Flynn, is it really conceivable that Clapper and Comey and Brennan and Strzok and Page all went off on their own independent expeditions? Oh, yeah, let's get this guy Trump. No. Somebody coordinated that. Somebody gave the order. And we now know that the initiator was quite likely Hillary. And the head of the rattlesnake, you might say, is Obama. Obama gave the order. The others were merely carrying it out. And the same with the election fraud. The election fraud, if it occurred on a big scale, would have to be, to some degree, coordinated or organized. And it's to me terrifying that we can go forward without even having this case heard, without even knowing what was in fact the case. Now, I guess we could find out after the fact, after the election, and then we would know for sure. But it is better to find out when you can actually affect the outcome. It is better to find out now. It's better not to set up a precedent in which an election can be rigged, setting up the rigging of future elections, and really bringing to an end anything resembling genuine American democracy. So we're faced with some troubling scenarios. I mean, I can't think in my adult lifetime when there has been such an across-the-board breakdown of faith in basic institutions. And remarkably, the other side is very cavalier about this. I think the reason for this is because they know that they're doing it, and it's almost as if they're daring us to do something about it. See, normally someone who's on the winning side of any kind of contest is very eager to demonstrate that the process was fair. You know, if you're LeBron James, you're considered the best basketball player of your age, and someone says, well, you know, the thing about you, LeBron, is that every time you go up to dunk the ball into the basket is dropped by 6 inches. In other words, you have an unfair advantage. He, more than anybody else, would be outraged. He, more than anybody else, would be determined to show, no, don't be ridiculous. In other words, I want you to see that the process is fair so that by a fair process you can recognize my legitimacy and my worth and my excellence. So if Biden won fair and square, you'd think that Biden would be in the forefront saying, yes, audit the machines, do signature verifications on the mail-in ballots. But of course, no. Biden is keeping a kind of eerie silence about this. The whole mood on the left is not even that the election was fair, but rather, let's move on. You know, it's almost like the guy telling his battered wife, yeah, I broke your nose and I battered your eye and you've got a black mark and you're wearing sunglasses, but you know what? Put a smile on your face. Let's move on. Everything's going to be okay. No, it's not going to be okay. It's actually never going to be okay. And this is the situation that we are in as a country. Now, long term, where do we go with all this? I mentioned earlier, and I want to press this thought a little bit further because it's a little bit of a radical idea, and I offer it here just for consideration and for discussion. And that's this. Isn't it a fact that long term, if we are not going to live in their America, if we don't want to be forced to go to schools where they will indoctrinate our children, if we don't want to go to universities that we subsidize, that will poison the values of our sons and daughters against their parents, if we don't want to live and consume for entertainment and amusement a degenerate culture in which they want to undermine, if not poison, our values, what are we going to do? Well, I think what we have to do is create separate institutions. We have to create legitimately a separate America and live in it. And then perhaps thanks to the Second Amendment, guard it. Protect that culture from the other side. And this is a tall order because it involves building institutions that will take a lot of work to build. We will have to have comedians and laugh at their jokes and not at the jokes of Jimmy Fallon and Saturday Night Live because we don't find those jokes funny. We can't laugh at them even if we want to. So ultimately, this is a recipe for, I would call it, an institutional secession within America. We're not seceding from the country. We're not trying to create a separate country, but we're creating a country within a country. And to some degree, we already have it. And what I mean by that is that we often talk, and we do too on our side, in generic rhetoric, we talk about the American flag, we talk about the national anthem, we use the phrase we, but we now have to pause in a way we haven't had to before and ask, who is the we that we are talking about? Do we really have an American flag? I mean, it's our flag, yes, but is it their flag? What if they don't want to salute it? What if they want to burn it? We have a national anthem, but is it really the national anthem, or is it our anthem? They don't want to sing it. They want to take a knee. Are we going to force them? So we've reached a stage where even the basic symbols of America, and symbols, of course, aren't just symbols, they stand for other things, in this case, for American exceptionalism. And American exceptionalism is what the other side doesn't want. And the things in American history that we consider to be triumphs, they consider to be failures. So we've got a very odd situation in which you've got two groups of people who are, to some degree, no longer friends, now trying to subsist under the same American roof. And I think that not just in this election, but over the next several months and perhaps even years, we're going to have to figure out what to do about this very peculiar situation. It's no longer Reagan's America. I'm not sure if we're quite in Lincoln's America. I said in the movie Trump Card, we're in a domestic Cold War. And it's a domestic Cold War against a domestic opponent. Let's remember the Reagan Cold War was against a foreign opponent, and it's relatively easy to bring a country together when it's facing an international threat. We do have international forces, China, radical Islam involved in American politics, but they now work through the Democratic Party. The remarkable thing is that our enemies abroad now work with our enemies at home to try to undo us. And that is the reality of our situation. We'll be right back.
Okay, that's based Dinesh D'Souza. Okay, let's get back to learning to validate ourselves.
But if you do feel something different, which is what I was doing when you were talking to Annie, I was feeling all different kinds of emotions, other than anger. And I it's the first time I ever felt that way. And it wasn't even me talking. I was just feeling what I was feeling as you were saying, go ahead and feel instead of think. Yeah. And I think that's one of the biggest problems is we overthink.
Are you aware of feeling anything right now as we're talking?
Right now I'm feeling like for 10 years I've missed the whole thing. For 10 years of trying to get over this, I have missed the whole point.
Yeah.
By overthinking it.
Yeah. What are you feeling right now? As we're talking, as you go inside.
I'm feeling some openness. I was feeling a lot of heaviness in my chest.
I'm hearing sadness, Ginger.
Yes.
Are you aware of that?
Yes, I am. I'm very sad.
Good. See if you
because
can just... No,
I'm
because.
Feeling sad.
No, because. Just
okay.
Focus on the feeling of sadness. We don't want to get into, overanalyzing, the precipice for it and everything, but you feel sad right now. And I want you just to check in and explore what sadness feels like for you. What does it feel like in your body? What happens to your body when you feel sad, and how is that manifested? You don't need to say anything. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to lead it. You don't need to make it go to one emotion or another. You let the emotions lead. And all you do is you're just an observer, and you follow it, and you give yourself that space that you were talking about, that openness to feel it. And what do you notice as you just let yourself feel this feeling in your body? What's happening?
I'm crying.
Yeah, good. Just let yourself feel this sadness, okay? I think that there's a long time where you were trying to figure out your emotions, and right now what you're doing is you're just letting yourself feel.
So what happens on this show? This show is an instrument of God's peace. Where there is hatred, we sow love. Where there is injury, we give pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. God, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. And it is in dying that we are born to eternal life.
let yourself feel. And I want you to, as you're feeling, just be aware of what's going on in your body. See if you can familiarize yourself with the feeling of softness in your eyes, and maybe a feeling of heaviness in your stomach or your chest. And right now we're teaching, your right brain, we're teaching your inner child that it's okay for you to feel this way, and it's safe for you to feel this emotion right now. I think for a long time, you felt like it may not have been safe, and so your mind was eliciting a lot of defense mechanisms. But, right now, at this very moment at least, it feels like it's safe.
Look, Lipped. From this day to the ending of the world, be we in it shall be remembered. We few. Just got 11 live viewers right now. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he who today sheds his blood with me shall be my brother, be he ever so vile. But this day shall gentle his condition.
And that's what we want to teach it, that's okay. You see that?
Yes.
I bet it feels relieving for you to allow yourself to feel this sadness, doesn't it?
Yes.
Something that you've been holding in for a long time.
I had to stop thinking.
Yeah, you just had to let yourself feel. And I'll tell you, Ginger, you let yourself feel like that, and it will just pass. And your body is so happy, it rewards you with a break from your anxiety or a slight reduction in your pain. Right? That's what happens. Is your body is it is trying desperately to get you to feel these feelings, but it doesn't have the power of speech. It's your right brain. The only way it can get a hold of you is through these symptoms.
So is the pain taking the place of the feelings?
Well, the pain is your mind's way of defending you from the feelings. We are all blessed with a litany of defense mechanisms to keep us from these feelings of pain. Anxiety, depression, pain, obsessiveness, rumination, intellectualization. There's a lot of different defense mechanisms that our mind does in order to keep us from these feelings, but deep down we feel like these feelings aren't safe and we need something to keep us from them, and that's why our mind comes up with these defense mechanisms. So our job, my job as a therapist and your job as being, your own therapist, is to create a system or a situation where it becomes safe to feel these feelings, so you don't need these defense mechanisms. You don't need the pain. You don't need the chronic anxiety.
I think it's always been, with me, the fear that the feelings will just take over.
Yeah, but do you
and
see
I'll go
what happened?
crazy.
Look at what happened just now, Ginger. Like, you allowed yourself to feel a lot of sadness, and you felt it really powerfully, and it seems to be fading right now, and you're still here, and you're still sane.
I think it's that little child that thinks that, though. It's not the adult me.
With sadness, it's like, I'm going to get so sad, it's going to overwhelm me, and I'm never going to be able to get out of the house again.
Mm-hmm.
But what we just taught your right brain a little bit, Ginger, is that you felt sadness. It passed. It might be there a little bit still, and you're still fine. And when it learns that over and over and over, it kind of starts to poke its head out of its shell like a turtle and see, okay, it is safe. I can allow this feeling of sadness to come. It's like a gradual thing. But thank you, Ginger, for asking that question and allowing yourself to, be vulnerable enough to feel your feelings in this situation.
You're welcome, and thank you for doing this call.
You're welcome.
This is the saddest song of all, for it signals the end of a wonderful, inclusive, love-filled stream. You are loved.